Love, that ever-flowing liquid fire of light, ever-expanding and illuminating truth, which is always revealed with wisdom, a spiritual nutrient necessary for vitality that is maintained through selflessness, a filter of ether that aids purity, which is love. Love, a limitless paper lantern floating into infinity on the intentions and actions of initiates of the mysteries. All right, welcome everybody. We got a special guest with us here today. We got Michael Joseph. Michael, how you doing, brother?
Not bad, Ross. Thanks for having me.
Oh, dude, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. Normally, I like to start this off with like a really simple question to kind of let people know your mindset. What are you grateful for today?
It's pretty much the same things every day. Just my friends and family, my girlfriend, my health, and having enough free time and not a soul-sucking job that I can come home and, get things done that I'm interested in, and for functioning equipment like my computer, which is ancient, and my car, which is ancient. So as long as those things can keep going for a while, I'm pretty grateful for most things in my life. So
No, I think that's awesome, man. I mean, for me, learning to find gratitude in those very basic things opens up such a deeper level of happiness and existence overall. I think a lot of people overlook that sometimes.
yeah, and when you're talking, when you're involved in like kind of like spiritual discussions, it's kind of like easy to like, crap on materialism and stuff like that. But like, I'm thankful for the possessions that I have, but it's because they allow me to do things that, are more expressive and stuff like that. So, having the musical equipment to do music, doing the recording equipment, stuff like that, like, I'm super happy that that's the positive part of technology for me, although there's a lot of negatives.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, on my own journey, like with spirituality and stuff like that, there was times where I really felt like I should like live in a cave with nothing and all that kind of concept. And my understanding of it now is completely different. Part of my existence is to enjoy living. It's just being in a good place with having those things and being grateful for it, treating it with respect. I mean, it's nice to have those things. Like you said, it makes your ability to do things you enjoy easier, I guess, and your ability to enjoy life easier.
Yeah, I think that, like you said, treating them with respect and, obviously not being like overly indulgent about it or like wanting more, to me, I always think it's great to be able to work with what you have and try to get really good with those things, because you'd be surprised how much you can produce with just some simple stuff,
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. What quotes do you feel most moved by, and can you explain what they mean to you personally?
I think that one that is extremely profound to me, that I definitely apply to just about every moment of my life, is I forget what verse it is, but in the Bible, where take the log out of your own eye before you attack the prick in somebody else's, and just make sure that before you accuse somebody or call somebody out and stuff, make sure you're not doing that yourself. And because if you are, it's going to come back to bite you. And I'd say I really like a Malcolm X quote, where be careful when you read the newspapers, because they'll having you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the oppressors. And I think that I see that all the time after looking into non-mainstream sources on world events. And I like the George Orwell quote from 1984. I'm kind of paraphrasing, something to the effect of the best books are the ones that reaffirm what you already know. And I don't necessarily completely agree to that, but there are times where it's like you're reading something and it reaffirms something you've already thought. So it's just nice to be like, oh, wow, I'm not alone. Somebody else has thought this, or I'm not crazy, you know? And so that to me is something that it's just nice to have that reaffirmation that you had a thought about something and there are other people that have had the same. And so I don't know, you just need that reaffirmation sometime. As much as you want to be an individual and stand on your own, you still, it's helpful.
No, I agree, man. There was times where I felt so alone with some of the things I thought, and like our culture kind of has like that. I want to say it's like the fifth monkey concept in some ways. Have you ever heard that phrase or that study?
Is it I think the numbers might be different. I think like isn't it like the 12th monkey or the 99th or 90? I don't know.
There's a 100th monkey effect, and there's like this story of the fifth monkey or something.
Fifth is different.
Yeah.
Okay, what is the fifth?
I could be mistaken on the actual name of it too, but there's these monkeys in this lab, and they put this treat on top of a ladder, and then when the one monkey goes up and gets the treat, it hoses the rest of the monkeys, and then over time they kind of pull all the other, like trade all the monkeys out, but eventually all the monkeys are trained to not climb up the ladder because the other monkeys will attack the monkey that goes up there to get it because they don't want to get hosed or whatever. It's kind of like that with when people come to certain realizations about things. If they have a different belief than everybody else, it seems like people will attack them, put them down. So it is nice to kind of find that common ground with certain people, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
The 100th monkey thing is pretty interesting too, though.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if I've ever really experienced that firsthand, but it is something interesting to think about.
Yeah, I've never experienced the 100th monkey thing firsthand.
I've never just been able to start randomly doing something because people miles away do able to do it.
Right.
As far as I know, you know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I wonder if that was possible, if you would even know, like, oh, these people are doing this now.
Maybe if I just like hung outside, you know, a basketball stadium, I'd just start getting really good at basketball. Wishful thinking.
Yeah, right. Okay, could you explain who you are and what you do?
I guess I'll just limit it to how you kind of came across my research. At the moment, just a person who's been doing a lot of alternative research into esoteric topics and some might call conspiracy, and, you know, viewpoints of secret societies and just occult literature and stuff like that, and just how it is implemented and shapes our world, and trying to find some understanding of why that actually is, and, you know, try to be honest about it. And so I've been creating YouTube content that goes over a lot of source reading, which is driving fundamental world organizations like the United Nations, and trying to read, okay, there's world organizations that affect everything following these teachings. I should probably know something about those teachings because they're kind of in charge of a lot of stuff. So that's kind of was the fundamental premise. And then it kind of morphed into this really long thing that I'm finally coming to the close of and looking to step away from for a while.
Mm. Yeah, I really appreciate your approach to that. The first time I ever heard anything about you was through the Higher Side chats. I enjoy listening to that. I obviously don't agree with everything that he has on there, but I like to entertain different opinions. And I liked your approach so much because you did a very good job of just presenting information, I feel, and not necessarily putting any particular spin on it or ideology or anything. Just saying, I studied this, this is what I found out, and this is how it relates to this. I think you have everything organized in a very helpful way. I haven't been able to check out all your videos because you put so much work into them and created such a huge library of stuff that it's a little overwhelming. I will like to check all of them out though.
I guess the way I approached it was, you know, how would I want information presented to me? That's kind of like, I'm also a musician, and we can maybe touch upon that later, but you know, when I write music, I'm always like, okay, objectively, if I was listening to this music, would I think it's good? And so much of my early stages of it, it's like, no, not good. But that forces you to write things that you actually enjoy. And so that's kind of a philosophy that I try to adhere to if I'm creating things, where it's like, okay, if I feel compelled to put something out there, how would I want it from my own eyes? And I would want things to be, objective. And I have no problem with people interjecting their opinions on things, but at least kind of let that be known that, okay, this is what this says. Here's kind of where I'm at with it, but what do you think?
Mm-hmm.
So you're not, it's fine to give your opinions, but don't try to deceptively steer people into that because you want people to think like you and have some sort of reaffirmation of your beliefs to make yourself feel good. And I feel like I see a lot of that going on in this alternative research community. And I understand it. It's very hard because you're looking at some really intense stuff and it's very emotional, you're trying to figure out what's going on in the world. And so, to keep it more short, just, I like reading things in context. Basically, when you look at other researchers and you try to, okay, they said they got this from here. And when I go look at that and I read it, I find a lot of times they've taken something out of context and their viewpoint on certain things and you can understand why they've done it. So I have some understanding about it, but at the same time, I'm like, well, it's kind of still misleading people. So I try my best to not do that, even though I'm a human being. I have biases. I actually have very strong opinions on a lot of the research, but I try to keep back from that. And because I want people to think for themselves. And I guess I'll sort of wrap it up by saying, like, I see a lot of people that will say, like, they'll prop up a straw man argument on somebody else and say, oh, they're a deceptive person. Their research is flawed. They're lying to you. They're a shill or whatever you want to call it. And I know the truth and I have good research and mine's honest, so come to me. And it's just like, if somebody's doing that, I already have red flags. You know what I mean? Like, if you need to do that, because what you're really saying to the audience is, you're too dumb to see through bullshit, and I can. So I'm going to tell you how to see through bullshit. And it's like, that doesn't breed independent thought. People need to look at something and to figure out for themselves whether they think it's deceptive or not. And they need to have their own thoughts about it. And so that's why I try really hard to do that. And it is funny because I have gotten a lot of reactions where people are very confused because I'll be very critical of a certain viewpoint, like Christianity, but then I'll be very sympathetic to it. And then I'll be very critical of like more occult versions of stuff and then more sympathetic to certain things, because that's just how I am with everything. If there's something there that resonates with me, that's cool. And if something I'm like, I don't know about that, so I've actually gotten a lot of accusations about things that are completely the opposite of what I believe. And it's just kind of funny because you're seeing people's reactions to sensitive material. So you got to deal with that. And so there you go. I try to be objective and I fail sometimes, and it's just the way it is because I'm a human.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it would be very hard. Like I've had to distance myself from a lot of different conspiracy circles because I used to be way more into it. And I use that term lightly, knowing that it was a term created by the FBI or CIA to discredit people or whatever, or being told that, I should say. I don't know specifically, but I find that to be true. But it's very caustic, and it is very this us against them mentality, and they'll throw anybody under the bus. I remember last summer, I'm not a flat earther myself, but I asked questions to flat earthers in this one Reddit forum, just trying to get answers. And everybody was just insulting me, insulting the flat earthers. And I'm just like, all I want to know is what their opinion is and what the payoff of this would be. Like, I'm genuinely curious. Like, why can't we have an open dialogue? And they're like, all these people should be executed and stuff. And I'm like, wow. Here's the thing. If you start executing people because of their beliefs solely, it puts you in dangerous territory, because what if your beliefs change and then you're the one on the chopping block? So I don't know, man.
Yeah, that's a very polarizing argument. And, again, to be perfectly honest, like I see a lot of what they're saying as legitimate in terms of like, we're trusting a lot of stuff. And this thing, I'm not good with science. I'm not good with observation. I'm not good with math. So a lot of the arguments to tell me, oh, this model works because of this. It's like, well, I don't understand the math. So I'm just trusting that, you know, that is correct.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, my biggest problem is I've seen a lot of people believing stuff that I can't even believe that they've been able to get us to think a certain way about something where it might be completely the opposite. And not even just in a conspiracy world, but in my own life, I've heard people like describing like what they thought a situation was. Like they were in an instance and they were like, yeah, can you believe that person, they did this? And I'm like, dude, like, that's what you got out of that situation? Like, actually, you were the one being the asshole, not them. Like, I've seen people be very delusional about things in just everyday life, and myself included.
Mm-hmm.
And so the strength of shaping perception is incredibly strong. And so that really leaves me open to a lot of things. But at the same time, you know, I don't care. It's like, I care more about how people treat each other. And it's way more important to be respectful of other people, and rather than like, but what's very strange is, you know, I don't want to get too off topic, but in the series, from the esoteric occultist side of things, their religion is based upon the idea of like viewing the earth as geocentric or flat or whatever as being like the most ignorant, stupid thing in the world. Like that is part of their religious belief. And if they're in control of a lot of things and helping shaping our mindset, isn't that weird how that is the ultimate first word that pops up is ignorance, if you think that? And so psychological things are weird to me, where it's like, you know, if somebody believes that the Easter Bunny created us and popped out an Easter egg and here we are, like, I don't care. It's crazy to me, but like, why would I be upset about that, you know? And what is very interesting, I guess, like that's the whole crux of the series, is that so much of science that seems secular has actually been completely built upon religious concepts that go back thousands of years. If you want to take the historical, you know, chronology of these things as legitimate, you know, all of these ancient teachings, like the Big Bang comes from Kabbalah, evolution, Darwinian evolution, according to the occultists, comes from Kabbalah and Eastern traditions. So much of like what you read in these esoteric things, you're like, well, that sounds like what science is telling us. It's just without that spiritual part to it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to really make up your mind. Well, what do I think about all this esoteric stuff? Is this the lie in the garden, or is this something else? You know, and what is good there and what is bad there? Is it all good? Is it all bad? Is there certain things that were good at the start and have been perverted, or was it never good at the start? So at least the series forces you to make up your mind about that kind of stuff. And then based on, for me, I always have to look at psychological situations. You know, what breeds behavior in people? That is how I say like, something's not right here, you know, and so that's kind of like my compass with a lot of this stuff, where it steers me. And I'll just say that I can see a lot of different viewpoints, and I can't, like, once you pick a side, it's like, if you're shown something that's opposite of that, you're going to feel pretty dumb. So do you just deny it and then keep going with your belief? Or do you man up and say, oh God, maybe I was wrong about this, even if it really hurts?
Mm-hmm.
And I try hard not to put myself in those situations, because you see it happen to other people a lot, and you've seen it happen to yourself. So that's why I don't really make grandiose decisions on saying I'm this or I'm that, or I believe this or I believe that, because it's pretty gray area with a lot of it. And I think that it's okay to just say, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's actually the truth. Like, we're just not in a position to actually know some of these things. And people want to know these things so badly that they latch onto them. And isn't it weird how when people do that, there's just so much freaking conflict that comes up. And it's just like, I don't want to be a part of that. So that's kind of my take on it. Whatever you believe about the shape of the earth, I don't care. I don't even know what I think about it myself. I just think that there's a lot of weird hidden stuff going on, and it's very psychological.
No, I would definitely agree. I mean, personally, I honestly don't know what it is either. Like you said, I don't know the science. There's no way that I could know. I mean, and I can understand how maybe if it is, it's a good way to discredit a lot of other information that may be valid in people's I'm trying to think of the word. I don't know. I'm kind of brain dead right now with the word, but you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and it's like, you know, things work with the way it is. Like, you know, they can, all these things are predicted, and, you know where, like, the sun's going to rise here and there and stuff like that. So it's just like, I sympathize with, like, the traditional argument of, like, the current heliocentric model with a lot of things. It's just like, I'm able to get to where I go with, like, GPS, and the sunrise here will be when it says. So it's just like, okay, well, there's something that works about it. So, and then you have people on the other side that are just, they're trying to make some things work and they're just not able to. And, so how can I just dismiss that?
Mm-hmm.
So you could say that, well, they haven't had all the resources to do that because it hasn't been the way that, people haven't been looking at it through that way for a long time in a group sense. So, I'm very sympathetic to both sides of it. That's kind of where I'm at with it. And, if people think I'm stupid for even entertaining it, then fine. I don't give a shit. There's way worse things in life. Like, I don't let it ruin my day. I care more about personal interactions with people than grandiose questions about the shape of the world as a definitive answer.
No, absolutely. Regardless of the shape of the world, I still got to do the same stuff I'm doing right now. So it's like, it doesn't change anything if it's flat or if it's round for me, really.
And I guess I'll just add one more thing before we go to another question. The thing that does concern me the most is that people who defend, like, the current system, and I guess I would say, like, are of a more atheistic mindset, and they basically are fighting religion in a way. And I know a lot of people that have been, like, traumatized by religion growing up. So you kind of go to an opposite polarity where it's like some people go completely atheistic and they're like, there is no God and blah, 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 because they're mad at what they've seen as a version of God. And then some people go into a more, I don't want to say new agey mindset, but, like, some people go down that road, and a lot of times it is because of, like, a more traumatic religious experience from people around you, or maybe they grew up in an ultra Christian household. But what's really weird is that as much as people want to combat religion, you're actually secretly promoting a religion, and you just don't know it. And if you did the research, it seems pretty obvious to me that you are like that. Like, people can try to argue that, but I think that at least the one thing that the series has shown is, like, man, science is the mystery religion through and through. Like, I don't see any really other argument about it that makes sense that it's not, just because those things are so old. And it's just sort of like, so why is that? Is there because there's truth in that, or have people been shaping our reality based on their religion? And so if you hate religion so much, shouldn't you be angry at that? See what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a very real question that comes up in the series. And, if you think you're fighting religion and waving the flag for it by defending science, I think you might want to think about it a different way, because maybe you're being used for an agenda that you don't know you're part of. And if you know you're a part of it and you can make a conscious choice, be like, okay, I'm cool with that, then that's fine. But to me, if you're being deceptive about indoctrinating people into a religious viewpoint and they don't even know it, to me, that's messed up. That's just the way I look at it.
I think that's a very healthy way to look at it. I mean, I never really had a lot of religion in my life growing up or anything like that. And I used to have very harsh views of religion overall. Through my own experiences, though, it's really softened. And I don't take science as a whole as all truth, and I don't take religion as a truth for all of it either. I think that there's validity in elements of all of them. It's kind of like a buffet style. I take what I think works for me, what doesn't. Some things in science that I don't have the knowledge to understand, I can say I think that that's interesting or whatever, but that's pretty much as far as I go with a lot of that stuff. There's good stuff and bad stuff in all things. It's really how you use it and what you use it for, in my experience at least.
Yeah. And for me growing up, like even before I looked into anything like this, even before I was like looking at anything more metaphysical, like astrology and whatever, um, I always just thought like, why should I believe what we're taught about some of these things? They just seem like how the hell can you know that we're, 90 million years old as a planet, or like how can you tell what life was like 5,000 years ago? Like, how do you know that all this stuff is that far away? Like, it just seemed like it was really arrogant to try to just like, oh, we know this and that's how it is. We started from this big bang or we evolved. And it's just like, it just made no sense to me that you could just say that so definitively. And I just thought there was
Hmm.
a lot of arrogance in that. Not that I knew the answer, but like, and I also thought too, growing up, like when I was reading history, I'm like, somebody could just made all this shit up. How the hell would
Right.
I know? Like just really innocent questions like that. And that is one thing that is very interesting about going through all of this esoteric stuff is it's made me very interested in history. Not that I say I know what happened in history. I have no clue. But
Hmm.
it is interesting getting the esoteric society's viewpoints of history and then getting what the Hollywood version is or what we see on like the History Channel, which to me is just the Hollywood version,
Hmm.
university level research that it's really strange because so much of what, at least from what I've researched on certain things, um, like the Dark Ages, for example, when I've looked at people who are, university researchers, PhDs, like the scholarly world, they basically say there's a lot of myths about the Dark Ages and like, it's basically been completely blown into some like completely evil, oppressive thing where anybody had a free thought and it was just like they were burnt at the stake. And it's weird because that's the mystery religion's viewpoint of it, because their religion wasn't in charge during that time. If and some people think that that era of time was just completely fabricated and made up. 1,000 years was inserted in the timeline. That's like way more fringe conspiracy. And again, I don't know what I think about all of it, but I like taking all these different viewpoints, and it's just like, well, people in the scholarly community who seem to be pretty objective about a lot of stuff. These are the sources we have to describe what happened with Hypatia of Alexandria or the Great Library and whatever. And people will distort that and make it seem like because this figure was killed by a fanatical mob, they automatically assume that it was crazy Christians or crazy Muslims.
Mm.
Because it's easy to do that because there has been a concerted effort to make Orthodox religion seem way more crazy than it is, in my opinion. But I'm not an apologist for it. But I'm just trying to be objective when, like, it's hard when you're like defending this thing that you've been programmed to see as the bad guy. But it's just like, well, wait a second. Maybe this has been distorted for a reason. And so to me, it's like this weird religious battle, like the mystery religion, as far as I understand it, it's weird how their viewpoints on history almost always line up with the Hollywood versions. And there's so much
Mm.
esoteric stuff in Hollywood. Well, what's really controlling that? And then like university level research where it's kind of like really not sexy and boring. You're in there in a library looking through books and reading stuff that's not mystical and magical. It's just kind of matter of fact. Those are the versions that very are rarely heard,
Hmm.
and it's really weird how much the entertainment viewpoint of stuff shapes our minds. Because how many people think that they know what happened in history because they watched a movie? And
Yeah.
this is like to me, this is something that I realized my mind was completely shaped by so many things growing up with movies and entertainment and Hollywood and popular things in society. That's what it really came down to, where I really realized that I was programmed in a lot of ways that once I was able to have some confidence and be like, you know what, this is messed up, that I view it like I'm inclined to view way, or I'm inclined to view, somebody who's religious way, because in movies, it really is like this magical thing where they are shaping your perception, and they'll get a lot of that will say, oh, this was historically accurate how they formed costumes. So you're getting perception historical accuracy, but
Hmm.
then like the actual movie is actually like this allegory for like esoteric philosophy and religious concepts, but you don't know it. But once you study it, it's just like it becomes redundant. You know, it's like, oh my God, here's the same theme again. This profane creator demiurge consciousness is attacking these enlightened people, but it's like you're still getting a viewpoint from a religious view, mindset, and
Mm.
it's very clever. So I don't know. After really understanding a lot of that stuff, I'm a skeptical bastard, like about so many things now, because like, it's almost like, what can you rely on other than your own intuition about stuff? And when it really comes down to is a lot of times with this stuff, you're forced to like, be like, wow, I totally thought this group was awful. And that might be the case. And it might be like the Malcolm X quote where I was programmed to love the oppressors and hate people being oppressed. And the situation in Libya that I've talked about a few times in the series is one of the best examples of that. Not to go off on that topic, but
Oh, you're all good, man. This is giving me so much to think about. It's like really hard to like even like respond with something with that. So I think the best thing I can do is move on to the next question. Like I'm so
yeah,
wrapped
no
in
problem.
listening that like, wow, it's a lot to take in. I think you kind of answered this at the beginning of the last question, or at the beginning of what you were sharing last. Did you feel like you were different than others as a child?
Yes and no. I had certain experiences when I was younger that I guess, yeah, I'll share a more personal story about it. But basically, I grew up in a small town um, in Vermont, and everything was great when I was a kid. My parents were together. I really just loved being in my house. And then some things happened, and my parents got divorced. I don't know, I was 6 or 7. And there was a lot of things that I sort of witnessed that I was aware of that they didn't know, and just some really not good stuff happening. And, nothing really terrible, but, it definitely destroyed my family. And that was like, fitting my channel's name, Schism 206. That was really like the first real big split of this, great family unity. And that really changed everything for me because I was sort of like in a balancing position when I was younger where I, I, I cared about both my parents, but there were things about their involvement and all this stuff that was frustrating to me too. And then my sister, she was younger than me, much younger. And, it's like my mother had her boyfriend. My dad was very angry about that. And he was very depressed, and it was hard for him to be motivated to do a lot of things. And, I was like constantly trying to like quell my sister talking about my mother's boyfriend when we were at my dad's because it would make him mad and I didn't want to upset him. So I was like this diplomat. I was always like trying to, fan out the fire that just would never stop. And
Mm.
so, it was difficult in that sense, but other than that, like I had a really great upbringing. Like I had a lot of good families. My parents were really good to me. They cared about me a lot. It was just that they had that split. And then what really changed things is my mother got sick with cancer, and then she eventually became terminally ill, and then she died when I was 11 years old. And so that really forced me to grow up really quickly in a lot of ways. And that is where I would say, I felt like I was different than people because it was it was hard because you started to want to talk about more deeper intrinsic things, like even when I was that age. Because of that, I was just like wondering, like, you know why are we here, what are we doing? And it wasn't something I was like angry about. I definitely had my frustrations with it, but I was never like, oh, why me, why my family? It was just, you moved on. And um it was just like a lot of weird stuff. It's like you'd be in conversations with people, they'd be like talking about their mothers, and like the way I look at it was just like, oh geez, like, I don't want to talk about it because I'm going to make everyone else around me feel bad because I'm the guy who's talking about his dead mother. It's
Mm-hmm.
just like, they're going to be all like, oh God. And like, it wasn't sensitive for me to talk about it. So the reason I didn't talk about it a lot, because I didn't want to make other people uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like the story of my life. Like, I don't like other people like uncomfortable when it's, I guess, not entirely necessary to me. But when something becomes necessary and you have to confront it and talk about it, I'm pretty good about biting the bullet and doing it. But so, there was a lot of struggle with that, and growing up in a house where like my father, cares about me and my sister very, very much, but just he was very depressed about a lot of things. And so it's hard when you grow up in a depressing household because that makes you tired and depressed. And so I slept a lot when I was younger, and I kind of escaped into video games. And um, really what got me through is like there's a lot of families that were just, I was attracted to families that were together. Like
Mm-hmm.
all my friends, my good friends, like they all had parents were together. We sat down, we ate, and we didn't text each other back before that existed. And you just show up and walk in their house and say hi. And, you know, that's the kind of stuff where it's just like, man, that's one thing I'm thankful for is being able to remember a time when that actually existed, at least for me. So, it was kind of like a bittersweet thing where there was a lot of issues at home because of what had happened, but I don't view my life as like growing up as being like really difficult,
Mm-hmm.
like other than those things. Like I had a lot of really great people, and I had a small school, so it was like I was friends with a very wide variety of people. If you're gonna like categorize people, I was like friends with like the jocks and the stoners and the nerds and the whatever, the valedictorians, the super rednecky people because it was in Vermont, and it's like none of that defined people around us. And I think that was what was really cool about it. It was like people had different sort of backgrounds and things they were drawn to, but for the most part, we all like treated each other as individuals. And I think that was really special. And so it's hard as you get older, you see those things just kind of getting ripped apart with our current society and the negative effects of technology and stuff like that. So if I didn't have that as sort of like a foundation, like who knows where I'd be. I'd probably be way worse shape than I am. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really like was my introduction into like, you know, not feeling like not feeling normal, but at the same time I had this weird desire to just like I just kind of wanted to be an average person at that time, and just like I just want to be like a normal person. I don't want to be like, I just want to be somebody that people likes and just fun to hang out with. And then once I got to college for my very short stint, that was a completely different story. So I'll stop there.
Right on. I can relate a lot to kind of like having the family split up. My parents got divorced when I was in second grade, man, and that whole experience was very traumatic. Um, there's a Dr. Gabor Mate describes trauma as things that happened that shouldn't, or things that shouldn't have happened that did, basically. And I think that everybody is like witness to that. It's just to what extent and to what extent it affects them. Um, and I can also relate to like wanting to find that comfort in friends whose families were still together. And like being able to go over there and just kind of sitting at the table and like getting that family unit reality from those situations. It was really something that helped me a lot too. So I can relate
Yeah.
to a lot of that.
And well, that's really a part of like what I see in the media propaganda and the entertainment world. It's like, to me, after being honest with like a lot of things, like I realize that so much of what's going on with that is trying to rip that apart and sort of disguise a lot of it as like being free and independent and, forward thinking. But I've seen a lot of mindsets with that. Like it's frustrating because you see it's kind of like 1984. There's buzzwords. There's a word: love, hate, fear, freedom. Those are just words. Like my biggest problem is nobody thinks really about how they're enacted. How do they manifest? And people have different I think they have different attachments to things, where I think the people that are kind of, I like to say, running the show, even though I don't think they're really running the show from the grand scheme of things, but for right now, they're being allowed to do so. I think that they're really good at using these big picture concepts, freedom, things like that, oppressors, and they are so good at getting us to align with the macro part of that, and we don't see how the micro it plays out, because to me the micro has to match up with the macro. It's like, okay, what is freedom? Well, we have to define that. And what is in the situation? Is that freedom? Is that oppression? You know, and that's why things get reversed. And I just had to be honest that like a lot of things that I was like also very glued to television when I was younger. I watched so many movies, and um, you know, now that I look back, I'm blown away by a lot of the programming in it that is negative. But not to say that there aren't good things too, but like it's very strange how I just a lot of patterns I noticed when I was younger, but just kind of like didn't have the confidence to say, or I was kind of blinded by a little bit of arrogance. Like there's so much that has been done to try to turn you against your parents' generation, you know, like not to say that your parents are perfect, but again, distorting people to a level that they're not. I think that
Mm-hmm.
that is what they're really good at doing, where it's like, you know, our parents' generation grew up in the history books, however legitimate it may be or not. Like, you know, we're supposed to be proud of our nation, you know, and we're lucky to have like family, the atomic family, right? And while, you know, no family's perfect, it's not like Leave It to Beaverland, you know what I mean? Like, but there is something about sticking with your family unit that uh, is really necessary, I think. And it's hard because I grew up with good parents, so
Mm-hmm.
other people are going to have a different experience. They might have had terrible parents, and so they're going to be like, "What the hell are you talking about, dude?" Like, so it's really tricky. But I think that a lot of the things that divide us are because of media. And I'll just give one example before I shut up. When I was young, I really figured out what I felt about politics when I was like, you know, 8, 9 years old. I can't remember, maybe it's younger, because I remember when I was in school, I forget what grade it was, but there was an election, you know, presidential election. I think it was like George Bush and Michael Dukakis. I can't even remember. And it's like at school, you're like, oh, this is really important. You know, uh, you're choosing a really important decision, who's going to be president, and it was like, this is so important. You like everybody, and it's so great to be able to choose this. And I'm like, okay, you know, I'm in school. I'm like, all right, that's cool. I'm learning how this world works. And then everyone's saying like, you know, this is just great thing. But all I saw, I think this was before my parents got divorced. Um, you know, my dad was voting Republican, my mother was voting Democrat. You know, like that's kind of like the archetypes that they've been generally tailored to. And so I noticed my parents like taking pot shots at each other, not necessarily when I was with them together, but separate. Like, oh
Mm-hmm.
yeah, you know, your mother's gonna vote for, because I would have to ask them because of school, like, who are your parents voting for? So you talk to them, and then I was just like, the one thing I noticed is like, you know, my mom and my dad are acting different now. They're actually like kind of like turning against each other. Very subtle. It was an intuitive thing, you know, and it was just like that's all that I saw, you know. It was just like that's not right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, why is this so important if my family's just turning against each other, you know? And just like, to me, that was like an emotional thing that like I've never been into politics, because it's like, what if it didn't exist? People wouldn't be arguing about half the shit they argue about. And if it's the same fucking groups running it from the top, like very
Yeah.
strange how it is built on two pillars of Freemasonry, but the esoteric philosophy is that's unified at the top, and that the profane people view it as dualistic. And it's their really everything that they do is based on those two principles of polarizing, and they are the ones manipulating the synthesis of it. And you know, I learned that when I was young, and I just never gave two shits about politics because of that. And it's one of those things where you're like, oh, that's stupid. You're just a little kid. deciding what you think about it, but maybe I think that sometimes it's like that innocence that you need to have, that like, you know, as complex as the political system is, maybe there's just not, something is really not right here about it. And as I got older, I, I I've never really thought differently, although I have been like fooled before, like, you know, the Obama elections and stuff like that. That was sort of like, I always thought, okay, this guy seems cool, they want to change something, but I'm also really skeptical. I'm like, I'm not holding my breath. And I think at least when you do that, when something turns out to be not what you thought, at least you can save yourself the embarrassment of like, okay, now I have to defend this person that I was all in on, or just be like, I was duped. And it's really hard for some people to do. You know, politics for me, it's like, sometimes I think it's actually karmic, like in as a whole, as a collective, we're sort of in a weird way getting what we deserve. And I know that might not be a popular thing to say, but I think there's an element of that. You know, because I can't control what's going on in the government in any like really profound way, other than, okay, I can talk about the issues, but that's what you can really do with people, is like express your opinion on certain issues. And, you know, just because like this candidate says things about that issue that I agree with, well, my problem is I've agreed with both sides on different things, but does it even matter? Like, other than, because the way it's being implemented is not the way that I would want it to be implemented. And I think a lot of it just results in, you know, people are like capitalism or communism or whatever. It's like a lot of it is just like, you know, people should be allowed to work hard and get what they deserve, but not be so selfish that they forget about people who need help. And it's a balance, you know, and you're never allowed to have that balance. You know, it's always a polarization. And I think that's very telling.
Yeah, it's all divide and distract, basically. I definitely agree with that.
That's kind of where I'm
at. No, absolutely.
I don't know if you have any. But do you have any like experiences dealing with your viewpoints on politics over the years, like from when you were younger to like when you're 20s and now? Are you like 30 or?
I'm 33. I don't know. One of the very first things I can ever remember drawing was like a mock image of George Bush. So like I can remember that, and then I remember I was always kind of a weird kid in the fact that like I didn't really buy into government, and I was arrested in high school for having pot on me. They took me out of class, and then I realized like this big breakdown in government and like what the Bill of Rights actually meant, since I was being pulled out of class, questioned illegally, and all this kind of stuff. So I lost faith in the government at an early age. I used to have a bumper sticker on my car that said "Voting doesn't work," like all this kind of stuff. I too took a shot and kind of voted for Obama, but I didn't all out support him. And then in this past election, I decided to just not participate at all, which is what it is. But I went to visit my dad recently in Chicago. He voted for a different candidate than other members of my family. And I was trying to have a discussion about how I couldn't support either one of those people because they each represent different elements of things that I don't like. So it was, it's difficult to have a good discussion with anybody about that stuff in my immediate life for the most part, because they're all on one side, the polarized side of things. And I try to view it as removed from it as I can, and just kind of evaluate, this person doesn't have my interest in my best hand. Look at their track record. This person doesn't have my interest in their best hand. And then these other people all say all politics are crooks and they're all criminals and all this stuff, but yet they support a political figure. So it's just a big game to me, I guess, really. That's my experience.
Yeah. And the other thing is, when you're in that middle ground, people look at you and they try to categorize you, and you're like, wait, are you for Trump? Wait, are you for Hillary? Like, you know what I mean? Like, since they can't categorize you, they just have this kind of strange look.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes that can turn kind of nasty, where it's like, you don't care about your country and you won't vote. And like, I actually got that when I was 18 years old from one of my good friends. Like, we turned 18 and there was an election coming up, and I was asked like who I was going to vote for. And I'm like, I'm not voting for anybody. I was just like, my friend, who was always totally cool with me about so many things. All of a sudden, just like some demon just got attached to him. He was like, "What are you talking about? This is the most like responsible thing you can say." I'm like you're my like he's somebody who's so cool about things, and I'm just, where is this coming from? And you realize that they program you with an emotional attachment to things, and I know that's, you know what I mean? Even though I won't, I'll just say that till I get out of the conversation, you know? And I was just like, holy shit, okay, don't talk about politics with him ever again, you know? And, you know, it's tough because I think it's hard because I think that there are certain things that we want to believe in because there is something weirdly intrinsic about, you know, I don't mind having people ruling over me. It's just that like it's like being working at a company. You have a boss,
Mm-hmm.
and as long as they're, you know, they're doing a good job and they're more knowledgeable, and I feel somebody that I have the confidence that, okay, I can follow this person to a certain amount, and if, you know, something goes astray, I feel like I can voice my concerns about it. But so often you find you're in a situation where your boss has no freaking clue what's going on in the lower level. And this is like when I worked in a restaurant, it was sort of like that. And it's not that like I'm even being mean to them. It's just that like you really don't know that this is how it is. Like when I was like a line cook, or like that we deal with this, and then you have to like express that this new system they're going to implement is just going to screw everything up. But then they have this pressure from this other person that doesn't know what the hell is going on. And it's almost like I'm not one of those people that like, I never really had a problem with authority in the sense that like just because somebody's an authority, I'm like rebelling against it. It's just like, well, if what they're saying doesn't make sense to me, then I'm gonna like question it. You know what I mean? So, but again, I viewed my bosses as people, and so I was just blown away with like, you know, how is this person like making these decisions about this and they don't even know? Like, I was just like, what the hell's going on? Like, I was just kind of like baffled, you know, and I feel like that's kind of like a reflection of a lot of things. And there's a lot of people that probably have a similar experience. And, you know, I think that that's something that is intrinsic to people, where it's sad because I know a lot of families that like, you know, they want to be doing the right thing, but the hard thing is like everything has just been so corrupted in the sense that it is steering us towards something that is kind of scary to admit, in terms of like, you know, the people who are, you know, to me, it's like, again, not everybody in government is like some evil bastard. Not everybody in, you know, I don't know, the Catholic Church is some pedophile or something, you know? And it's like, it's really hard because you're also polarized to hate institutions. And I think growing up for me personally, I noticed there was a lot of my friends that when they had experiences with cops, they would just act completely like dicks and just like, oh my God, they're infringing upon my, I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? Like I think completely distorting what was happening, where I'm like, you know, man, you were the one who was acting out, and, you know, maybe the cop kind of was a dick to you, but you approached it like really aggressively. And I didn't, like, you know what? You were speeding. You did hit that stop sign, you know, whatever. Like, and I've actually had very few instances in encounters with police where I felt like I was being stereotyped or something bad was happening. There have been a couple, but I just feel like if you approach it immediately where you're going to just start being aggressive about something, I just noticed that there was a lot of people that could self-project something and pretend like they've done nothing wrong. Or at least like, hey man, you know that if you're going to drive 80 miles an hour down this road and a cop sees you, you're going to get pulled over. That's just the way it is. And they want to act like it was this great infringement on their rights to like even be pulled over. And I'm just like really, man? Like, I don't know. So I've kind of had this equal mindset, and it's just like, sometimes it's like, you know, I love you, you're my buddy, dude, but I can't side with you on this one. I'm sorry. I think you were kind of acting out of line and being a complete asshole to somebody who's a person. They don't know that a police officer is still a person. And you know, for me, I know people who are police officers, and, you know, every police officer is going to have a bad day, and some people are just going to be straight up assholes a lot of the time, and maybe they're just a person who's always going to be you know, kind of messing with people. Like, you got to take it on an individual basis. And I think that that's the number one thing to kind of not contributing to all the shit going on in the world is really try to view people as people first. And then if you realize you just don't like them as a person, then that's fine. But don't dislike them because they have a uniform or they have some sort of outfit at the start, because you're actually stereotyping them, even though a lot of those people will accuse of being stereotyped, you know, oh, I'm a young kid, or I have tattoos or whatever, like, and they're stereotyping me for that. And it's just like, you know, I have a butt ton of tattoos, and like, I've rarely been stereotyped, I thought, when encountering situations like that. And when I have been, sorry to keep going on here.
You're good.
Give one more example. There was this older guy who was a neighbor of a house that I did work for my job. And whenever I parked in the street, he'd always yell at me, even though it was a public spot. And be like, you know, like, you shouldn't park there because the street sweeper is going to come, even though that day the street sweeper didn't even come. Like, he just wanted me to park there. And it was like, you know, so he would always be giving me shit. And I'm just like, oh, this, you know, cranky old man. And some days he would just be like going off on me, and I'm just like, okay, it's an older guy, I'm not going to yell at him, but man, this guy sucks. And then one day I saw him trying to move like a lawnmower, and he was just having so much trouble. So I'm like, okay, you know, I'm going to get out and help this dude, even though he's always been an asshole to me. And he was like, oh, thank you. And I like moved it up, and like, you know, that day forward, he never gave me shit about the parking space ever again. Maybe in his mind, he was like, oh, look at this, you know, young kid that looks like, you know, because let's face it, there's probably a lot of people that have looked like me that have behaved poorly in front of him, and he has a stereotype about it. And I understand that now, getting older, you look at the younger generation and you see like how it's so much worse then, and it's hard for you not to stereotype them. So I think when you just have a moment where you show that you're a person, and that it like transcends all of those things. And now all of a sudden, like, this guy's never gave me shit about parking there again, and always said hi. And it's just like, oh, that's all it takes. It's just to show that you're a person. And it's really powerful that something that's simple, but I could have been like, oh, this stupid old man, he's an asshole, I'm not going to help him with this lawnmower. I could have been like that, but I've never been that kind of person. And when I find myself doing that, I'm like, Michael, what are you doing, dude? That's not who you are, you know? So
yeah,
it's hard. It's really hard. And luckily, I feel like my ability to be like that more often than not is because of my upbringing. And maybe if I had lived in a different situation, I would be a complete miserable person. So I can't even judge people for being, you know, less sympathetic to others. So that's what's really weird about it to me in our situation in life, where it's like, you have no idea what other people's situations are. So I try very careful not to be judgmental, but at the same time, if something is crossing the line and I have to speak out about it, then I'll do so. And it is what it is.
No, I think those are really very good points. I mean, in my personal experience, I used to generalize so much stuff, whether it be religion, police, all that kind of stuff. In my own personal experience with police, first time I was ever put on probation, I was in 5th or 6th grade because I vandalized stuff. That was really traumatic for me because they pulled me out of class for outside issues. Then I was arrested in high school for pot. Then through various times in my life, I got like DUIs or different things like that. And when I started recovery, I had to evaluate all that stuff. And I used to have like this victim mentality about all of it. Like, look what they did to me. And it's like, let's see, if I wouldn't have vandalized other people's stuff for no reason, probably wouldn't have got pulled out of class. Had I not been stoned and brought weed to school, doubt they would have busted me like they did in school. I wouldn't have been driving drunk. I wouldn't have got a DUI. And like, I've had the opportunity since I've been in recovery to actually speak to police about my experiences and stuff. Also, there was times when I was out west where I interacted with police, whether it was in Washington State where I got pulled over driving on a suspended license for a second DUI, and the cop just let me get to where I was going because he viewed me as a person, or whether it was in Northern California where they caught me with pot even though I didn't have a 215. And they just let me go. We're like, we don't want to deal with the ticket. Don't be an idiot. Just go home and smoke. And I started to have these opportunities where police treated me with respect, and that changed my perception of them so much. And it's like, I think it's next week, I'll be giving like my 7th or 8th speech to police about people in my situation with mental health or addiction issues. And it's cool because one of the things you said is actually something I bring up to them too, is they're people first, and I see them as people before police now, unless they act like a cop before a person in lots of ways. And I try to get them out of stereotyping people in my position. And that's part of my responsibility from being on the other end of wondering why they're treating me like somebody with drugs on them when I have a pocket full of drugs or something. Why would they treat me like this? Maybe because you got like a quarter of shrooms on you, dude.
Yeah, and I have a problem now as I've gotten older, is stereotyping younger people. Like, I really realize, like, in my head, but it's not like I do it outwardly. Everything is inward first, where I'm like, how am I thinking about this? And that's where I really try to like assess my state of being. And if that manifests outward, then I'm like double as much like, oh dude, like what am I doing? And it's very difficult. But then I just realized, like, man, the kids, you know, like maybe like in their early 20s, you know, 10, 15 years younger than me, they've dealt with so much more shit and programming than I did, where like it's really like amped up. And so I always need to just remember that. And that's my problem with like the whole, you know, in the series, I talked a bit about the social justice warriors and like actually like astrology associated with it. And that mindset drives me crazy, because it is, like you said, a victim and culture. But at the same time, I do understand that when you grow up in an indoctrination system where you're supposed to hate yourself and your country and like your heritage, and you go into a school system, and maybe you do have parents that are off and working because they don't spend enough time with you, and whether that is because they're a good parent or not, maybe it's just the nature of the beast, where it's like you have to make a certain amount of money because money is not what it used to be, you know. And things are way more expensive now, and it's just like, it's just this vicious cycle. And so I think when you're approaching people like that, you try to make it personal and show that you're a person. And if they can't see that, then it's not worth having a conversation with them about. And I have some people in my family who are kind of adapting this mindset. And that's another thing about looking into like the conspiracy stuff, where it's just like a lot of these racial shootings and stuff, I'm just wondering if they're just staged media events. Not all of them, some of them, whatever. Like, there's just way too many weird things going on with that. But I'm an honest person. I'm like, dude, that looks fucking fake to me. Like that, this person being shot on camera, it just does not look real. And it's just like, how hard would it be to fake that? You know what I mean? And, you know, that's something that you can get in some serious arguments for people. They're going to look at you like you have two heads talking about those things. But it's just like, you know, if they're inciting riots in people, like, that's fucked up. And it's so frustrating, because you really feel very powerless over the way it's all going. But at the same time, you have to just be like, okay, I can only do what's in my control with this and try to not contribute to it. And I can't speak up every time I need to and get into some big emotional argument, because that ruins my day. I'm a really sensitive person to other people's like emotional shit. I feel it really intensely coming at me, and it's just like, it stays with me the rest, like even just like negative YouTube comments, like no matter how much I get exposed to like people being angry at me, it's like I've never grown a thick skin for it. People say you do, but I've always just been like, it affects me so much the rest of the day, and I don't like that, but that's just kind of how I've always been. And it does toughen you up, but at the same time, like you just have to deal with that. Like, okay, I got to chill out, you know, because but at the same time, it allows you to learn something, because their fear clouds your analytical mind.
Yeah.
So you're getting what's going on in their heads, where it's just like, they're just a big ball of confusion. And it's sad, because you see a lot of kids that have, they want to do the right thing. Just like I talked about with everyday people, they want to do the right thing. They want to believe in politicians, stuff like that. But unfortunately, the system in play is so good at manipulating that, steering the right intentions into something that's a completely alternative agenda. And man, not everybody sees it. Very few people see it. And that's one thing that I can solidify with people in the truther community on, where it's just like, at least we can see a lot of those things, even though that's a whole different can of worms getting into that realm where people are constantly arguing and stuff like that. And it just goes to show you how good they are at manipulating and polarizing people. And all you can do is just really try hard to learn from it and grow from it and not contribute to it the best you can, but realize you're going to fall short because you're human. And that's what's really shaped my understanding about what's really going on in the world and our place in it. And, you know, that's kind of my journey with it up until this point.
Yeah, that's one thing I really have to practice a lot too. I tend to be very emotional as well, and like I take on other people's emotions also. Not to the extent that I used to, but I had a lot of work to do in that area of my life. And one of the things that's really helped me is realizing that people's perception of me is more a reflection of them than it ever is about me. And it's like, thankfully with what I've been doing, I haven't really encountered that many people angry at me, mainly because I don't really have any exposure yet, honestly. But like one time, one person called me weird, and I was like upset about it for like a day. It's like, like how could they think I'm weird? Like all this stuff. And I took it so personal. And then I actually realized, actually I am weird. Like that's one of my greatest assets, is that like I don't fit into this standard mold. Like, and like what would fitting in that standard mold, like that wouldn't make me happy, because then I would just be like everybody else. But learning to like separate myself from other people's emotions was and still is something that can be very difficult for me.
Some people are great at it. Like, I don't give a shit, whatever you say. And that's like one of those things, like, I was going to say, like, to your superpower question, I'll just answer it right now.
Yeah, totally.
I wish that was a superpower, that I could just like let things roll off my back and like not take that hit emotionally about stuff, because like that really like messes you up. But at the same time, you are getting a force of energy of like what's going through them, and it really makes you feel sad that that confusion that you got for that 3 hours of the day where you were like, oh, that fucking asshole left this mean comment. You don't really know what's going through them like all the time, if that meant that much of an impact on you. Where it's like some comments, like they're negative, but they make me laugh because they're just so ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I just like, I'm trying to think of one. I actually, luckily, I have not had very many negative comments at all. And that's the weird thing. I've had so many positive ones, but it's so hard to focus on those, you know, and I try to, but.
I think overall that like as a whole, our species is somewhat wired for negativity, to focus on that more than all the good things.
Well, I had one that said, "You're so full of shit." That was just the comment. And I'm like, well, it was a pretty long video and I said a lot of stuff. So what exactly am I full of shit on? That was just like, it was just very like, it was just, I just kind of like, okay, like that was just kind of funny. Like, you know, like
Right.
ones that are just so over the top and outlandish, like, you know, it's just like, it can be comical to me. Like I can get a lot of humor out of that kind of stuff. But then when things get into like, you know, a lot of personal things, you know, like one guy told me that I have no balls because I wasn't calling out the LGBT parades as being evil. And I was doing videos talking about how they're being utilized for esoteric purposes. And it's just like, you know, that whole movement in terms of like the transsexual thing and stuff like that. Yeah, I'll admit, like there's stuff about it that just weirds me out. I'm just not comfortable with it. And I think there's a lot of weird, deep stuff going on there in relationship to these root race cycles. And you know, you'd have to watch some of the videos, but it's very obvious how they're expressing esoteric religion as like a esoteric allegory or statement. But it's like, I know a lot of people in those communities, and like some of them have just like, you know, bent over backwards for me in my own personal business and stuff like that. So it's just like, dude, like I'm just supposed to get up here and be a hypocrite and start calling out all these groups when I know people that are in my real life. Like, it's not that simple. Of course, they had like a more Christian mindset. And it's just like, I have my own struggles with people in that mindset, because I actually have a lot of core values in the Orthodox traditional sense with certain things, but then there's stuff that I can't get behind any way, shape, or form. But again, it just comes back to like there's certain things that make sense to me about how I see things in the world. And so, you know, I met a girl, I don't know if it was a girl, but had gender identity issues and may have been she didn't really say, but, and then she told me her story about how like she was molested by her father and I think her uncle, and there was like rape and like incest in her family. And I'm just like horrified listening to this person's story. I'm just like, oh my God, like what the fuck do you say to that? You know, and it's sort of like, that's my problem. I think that like a lot of people who see these things for agendas, they don't realize that there's way more going on with all of that stuff. And I just take the viewpoint, it's just like, I'm just treating people as people. And if they're part of something that is good, bad, I don't know, like whatever, like what am I supposed to do? People are going to do what they're going to do. And if there's something that I'm not comfortable to be part of, I just won't be part of it. And that's kind of the way I've been my entire life. You know, when I was younger, like, you know, it's kind of hypocritical. Like, you know, when I was like in 8th grade, there was a lot of people like I knew that were like smoking cigarettes, and now I just didn't want to do that. But I still hang out with them. But I wouldn't hang out with them while they're off smoking cigarettes. And so that's just kind of the way I approach these sorts of things. And then later on, I became kind of addicted to cigarettes over various battles of that. Luckily now I'm not smoking anymore and haven't been for a while. But, you know, it's like, it's always the same case. Like if you're going to like completely demonize a group of people or something like that, it's just like that quote in the Bible. You got to take the log out of your own eye, the big chunk of all of your hypocritical shit, before you attack some small thing, because it will come back to bite you in the ass. And it has bitten me ass many, many times. And so, you know, unfortunately, you're dealing with a lot of people's emotional reactions to just the topics that I'm talking about. And I'm trying to be unbiased about it. But, you know, you're going to get that. And unfortunately, when you're talking about spiritual stuff, you know, there's a lot of people have very strong opinions about what is spiritual from kind of like a holier than thou perspective, not just the Orthodox side, but even on the, you know, the more spiritual ascension side, where people are like, you're not enlightened if you eat meat and shit like that. It's just like,
that one trips me up.
I just like, to me, it's like my intuition is like, I've always had like, I describe it as being like a magnet, where it's like if somebody says something that I agree with or something I feel is good there, like I kind of get drawn in. And then something, I'm like, whoa, wait a second, no. Even if it sounds nice, sometimes I'm just like, you know, like, and things try to distort that magnet. They try to numb it a lot, I think. And a lot of times, things I was involved in that I was convinced was like the way it was, I was really just numbing my magnet that was like trying to bring me back to reality. And then when I look back, I'm like, you know what? I knew all along that I was following something that was kind of, I don't want to say bullshit, but there was just something not right about it. But I didn't like want to believe that. And so I've had a lot of instances where I've had to just be like, man, I wanted the world to be this way. And then it's just not. And even though I accepted it and it sucked, it gave me a lot of peace about other things that I didn't worry about anymore. And that's about all you can ask for in this fucked up life, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that's been so helpful for me in my own journey of like coming to peace with different things of opinions, like back to like the LG, I don't even know the abbreviation for it, but I have different family members that practice that, and I've had friends that have been involved in it. And to me, it doesn't matter to me as long as they're not hurting people, which is pretty much what you said as well. Like as long as they're not hurting anybody with that stuff, which they really aren't. But the hurt comes in from those people having such stringent opinions about what people do in their bedroom, which is none of my business, really. But through I've lived like a very varied life in lots of senses. And from having my mental health thing and being psychotic for over a better part of a year, over a year, whatever it really was, like I realized how fragile reality is and how easy it is to get these like false beliefs and false ideologies like ingrained in us. And I think that it like humanizes so many other elements of people, from having been an addict and like treating women like crap, like just all the various people I've been in my life. And it makes me realize people's humanity and their weaknesses. Granted, I'm human too, and sometimes I can still be an asshole or judge people like, screw you, you should be perfect because I know this, so you should know not to do this because I know it, or whatever. But it's like, if I'm able to get myself out of my way and suppress my ego and actually look at people, a lot of times when people act from that hate or that anger or things, it's just pain or fear, really, is all that it is. So I'm grateful that I've had the opportunity to really evaluate that, which sounds like you have as well, because it seems like we have a pretty similar understanding. Granted, I won't say that it's identical, but because you've had different experiences, it'll lead you to different conclusions. But yeah, and with the vegetarian thing, like that's one thing that upsets me. Like sometimes people kind of have this, I'm more spiritual than you, or I'm more enlightened than you, I don't eat meat, meat is murder. And it's like, there's a lot of scientific evidence that proves that plants are somewhat sentient or have some kind of consciousness because of how they transfer nutrients, different things like that. So it's like, so what you're saying is this form of life is higher than this form of life, or it deserves to be treated differently. To where I think it's more about, it goes back to, again, respect, reverence for what you're consuming. Like when I worked in the one kitchen in California, I ate red meat like every day because I would be drunk and I just want a burger, and it was quick, easy. Once I kind of separated myself from drinking heavily, or drinking altogether, and smoking pot, and I evaluated how that made me feel when I ate too much red meat, I kind of walked away from it somewhat. I still eat it because occasionally, because I enjoy a burger every now and again. Like, I don't think that one thing makes, I don't think that there's one consensus spiritual way for people beyond love, compassion, respect, and tolerance, I guess, overall, which I've never been into mainstream religion, but that's one of the general threads that I've found in different religions that I've somewhat studied on the outskirts. Like Christianity, for example, largely opposed to it for a long time, but it's similar to what you've said too, where there are good principles in there. And when I was able to look at some of that stuff outside of the way that I had generalized it and realized there's a lot of good information in there, it's just how it's being expressed by certain groups of people or how they put their own spin on it. It really changed it. And then also it goes into these people being manipulated or following their own false ideologies, which I can't fault people on because that was 32 years of my life was in there. I'm probably still susceptible to it in some way now too. Like,
yeah, and you know, it's weird because Christianity is just a word. Again, how do you define it? Where a lot of the occult stuff is Gnostic Christianity. And, you know, I draw from the sources that I've been reading. So people can argue like maybe the versions I'm telling you aren't the real versions, you know, whatever. But the point being is that the versions that I've been going over throughout the series are the ones that the organizations who are seemingly in charge of the world are following, like, openly and admitted. You know, like the United Nations website or their spiritual foundation, Lucis Trust, admits that they're following Madame Blavatsky's teachings. And so when I go through her teachings with a fine-tooth comb and you see all these parallels going on in the world, and a lot of those things I would say are negative, even though there are some things that I can't help myself agreeing with what I read on a lot of stuff. So I can't, like, I'm not going to disown Theosophy and Freemasonry, but there are certain things in there, the way they're manifesting, that it's just like, well, there's something wrong here. And there are some core concepts that I personally don't agree with, that I will go to the Orthodox side with and agree with. But that's just because my whole viewpoint is, if I see things how they manifest in the world and also internally within my own self or consciousness and how I think about things, that's pretty much what I got to go on. And so, you if you're going to tell me that the world is this way, or this is how things work, and I just don't see that, then like, I'm sorry, but like, what am I supposed to do? Lie and agree with you because, you know, it's that. And so it's a very complex topic, but there are some things in Orthodox Christianity that I think really call out what's going on in the world today, like the whole one world religion, one world government, stuff like that. But then you have to get in debates on like, well, what is Jesus Christ? What does that mean to people? You know, and I was actually like I was like a saved Bible believing Christian for like 6 or 8 months, probably a couple years ago. It got me through some really traumatic shit that was going on in my time in my life. But I was also before that like one of these new age people trying to be like the Matrix, bending spoons with my mind, meditating. And I'm just like, eventually I'm just like, dude, I'm insane. What am I doing? But you have to be in that mindset to really understand that, like, I understand that mindset now. You put yourself in these places and then you have to realize, well, okay, now that I've had this mindset and I've absorbed the things that have brought me into it that I think are at least have some substance to them, when do you break free of what's still holding you down? Or do you just project or make up excuses as to why this is still the case, even though, I don't know. So I just had to ask myself some really honest questions about being in that Orthodox Christian mindset. And what really led me into it was a lot of emotional trauma and stuff. And that's what happens with everything. That's what leads people into all of these spiritual things. There's some sort of thing that breaks down your structures of what you thought the world was that leads you into that.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to be careful, because that is where I think a lot of these groups are trying to pull you into stuff. And at least that's one thing I can say from this series, where to me, it shows as a whole how all groups are being manipulated in like that stereotypical way. You know, stereotypes to me exist for a reason, because there are a lot of people that do sort of become like that. But at the same time, when the media puts it out there, it's so easy to be like, oh, I like most of the vibe of this group, so I'm just going to jump all in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so hard to get out, because then once you've been in and you've been rah about something with a bunch of people around you, and then you sort of start to turn on it, then all of those people are going to turn on you for being like, hey, maybe this activism that we're part of is being used in an alternative way. And then they're going to start turning on you. Not all of them, but some people might actually agree with you and be like, dude, thank God someone else said it. Now, you know what I mean? So it's weird, because you're going to affect people in a wide variety of ways. And that's so hard, because you want to always affect people positively. And sometimes you are, but you might be getting a negative reaction because that is an angry reaction to something that they're still a part of. But maybe something that you did later on and be like, wow, you know, 10 years down the road, maybe what Mike said was right. Or, you know, maybe you realize that about somebody. Like, man, you know, I thought they were crazy, and maybe they were actually right, you know? And so it's tough. And that's why I try to, at least also in the series, I kind of build it on those two pillars, Orthodox Christianity and esoteric Christianity or occultism. And I try to show both perspectives. Most of it is from the occult perspective. And then at least that gives people the polarities, and they can kind of, I always say, hey, if you end up on one or the other, that's your choice. What I do is I sort of take each side, and you know, it is like alchemy to me. You polarize things, look at them in the opposites, then you put them together, and you try to purge the dead weight from it. And to me, that's just the way your brain works. It doesn't have to be some like alchemical, mystical, magical thing about it. It's just kind of the way things work, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, there's words that freak people out, like alchemy. You know, if you're like more on an Orthodox Christian mindset, some people are like, well, that's satanic. But it's just like, well, you got to define all these things, you know? And Satan to the occultist is way different than Satan to an Orthodox Christian. In fact, Satan to the occultist is the Orthodox Christians, and Satan to the Christians is the occultist. And so they're pointing the fingers at each other a lot of times. And so to me, there's still this element of Democrats and Republicans with that mindset. And it's really bizarre. But in the course of the series, I think that's at least what I've been able to demonstrate that I can get behind, as like, at least I felt like that's something that is pretty obvious to me. Now, where you take that, that's your own thing. But last thing I'll mention before I stop this little tangent is the idea you were talking about, like having a victim mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really difficult because it's so easy to take that victim mindset. And that is a lot of this esoteric religion where they feel like they're a victim um, of the Orthodox oppression. And so they're making that oppression out to be greater than it is and make them seem like the heroes. And I just wonder if that is like something that's actually going on in the spiritual level above all this, devoid of all of these archetypes of people and stuff like that. Is there some spiritual entity that feels like it's been oppressed and it's projecting all this blame on the creator and that doesn't actually deserve it? And then we get all these religions that make, at times, the idea of a creator God seem crazy and stupid, because it's really bizarre how that is a theme that's always running through this. The creator God is the evil one, and then we're the ones to show you that you can be above that creator God with our system. But my question is, have they invented that version of the creator God as the straw man to pull you into their system where that version of the creator God doesn't even exist? And that is the illusion, like the Gnostics say, like the Gnostic demiurge. It is an illusion, but for the very different reasons. And I wonder if there's something going on where the force that's controlling the world right now is allowed to do so, because perhaps it is like the story of the Orthodox Lucifer, just in the mode of consciousness or spirit, not that there's some winged angel flying around. I'm Lucifer, you know what I mean? Like, that's
Yeah.
the problem. You're so programmed with that, you just don't look at it from like just a metaphysical way of like an intelligence or a way of mindset. And perhaps there is a force that thought it should be in charge, or the head honcho, or running things. And we're in a world where it has this opportunity to do so. And maybe we were duped by that force before that, and we're placed here to actually see how it works. And sometimes we have a victim culture. Why me? Why this? But maybe we chose to be here, but we had to have a memory wipe to have a clean slate to make an objective decision about things. And so it is this karmic growth and evolution. And it's not that I would love it this way. I'm not one of these people that, I get it, like learning from your negative experiences and they can be positive is important. But at the same time, I fucking don't like it.
Yeah.
And so, but maybe that is part of us being allowed to really learn something. And I think it's different for everybody. Everybody's situation is very personally tailored. Whereas a lot of the occult's viewpoint is the God or deity to them is impersonal. It's very collective. And I think that's telling too, where, we have like the internet, which with the whole transhumanist thing, it seems like they want to have like their minds uploaded that in the end or whatever. And that's a whole nother topic, but it breeds a lot of impersonal behavior in people. And while it's been great for a lot of things, so much of it is just like, just look at any online argument and it's just like, oh my God, like nobody would talk to each other like that in real life.
Mm-hmm.
At a time. And maybe that is a reflection of the spiritual metaphysical nature of it and what created it. So we have to use the things that have been created technologically that maybe were created for not the greatest purpose, but we have to be careful not to align ourselves with that. And so that is a mindset that makes me really understand and make sense of the world and be okay with, okay, I don't have a lot of hope in certain things in this life, but it still gives me hope in a lot of other things. I've been sort of like a pessimistic person with certain things, but very optimistic with others, where I don't think it's all pessimistic, but I have to be honest with myself. And that's just a pattern in my own life where it's just like, when I did choose a victim mindset, like, when I grew up, like I said, like my mother died when I was young, I did have moments where I would take that mindset, I didn't deserve this shit. And when I acted that way, immediately it came right back to bite me. And I'm just like, okay, that's not good. And it forced me to break out of that. And that's kind of been weird for me, where it's like, if I do something that I get punishment very quickly when I do something. I've noticed that, where it's just like, I do something where I sort of not sure if I don't think it's right, but I'm like, oh, fuck it. I don't deserve this. So I'm just going to, do it. And immediately it comes back to me. And I'll just, I'll do one story. This is going to be like your odd experiences part of it. It's this is the dumbest story in the world, but I think it's still like profound, where I was in Whole Foods one day and I was like looking at the prices of organic tomatoes, and I'm just like thinking in my head, I never do shit like this. I'm like, dude, I don't want to pay for a fucking organic tomato. So I took the sticker off the conventional one and put it on the organic one, so I'd save 50 cents. And I never do stuff like that. But in that day, I was like, I shouldn't have to pay for this. So I go up to the counter, and I only had like 16 items. I went up to the small checkout or whatever. And in my head, I know I'd done that. So I put the tomato in front so the cashier would scan it first, so I could just be over it in my head. Because like, I'm like, I'm nervous because I know that I did that, even though the cashier was, you know what I mean? Like, but I'm like, I'm freaking out over something that like, I still know was wrong. And what happens was, the tomato is right in front of the cashier. He picks everything to scan except the tomato until the very end. And I'm like looking, and then when he scans it, it comes up as like a $5.99 bag of onions. That one item scanned incorrectly, or he punched in the code like maybe incorrectly, but he's like, oh, I thought I punched it in. He's like, okay, let me take it off the receipt. And so he did that, and it was like 59 cents. And so then I get it, and I look at my receipt, and even though he thought he took it off, it didn't. I got charged for the $6 bag of onions. And I'm like, okay, God, I get it. Don't cheat on organic tomatoes. But it's like so dumb, but like I couldn't help but notice. And like, to me, this is why I like the book Crime and Punishment, where like something in your head tells you that you have the right to do something because, I'm a victim, or I should be here and I don't have these opportunities and whatever. And I was in that mindset, and it came back to punish me like 6 times more, 7 times more, how much like the tomato cost versus the bag of onions. I can't help but notice like that was really weird, like all of those elements. And it's like, how much of that is my own consciousness, like being paranoid about that because I kind of like know that I'm doing something wrong. And so whenever I've had like that victim mindset with stuff, shit like that always happens to me. And I just wonder, like, it really comes back to me quickly. So that's something I'm like afraid of. I'm like, okay, I don't want to do stuff like that. And so that comes back to my mother. She was very disciplinary with stuff like that. I stole a thing of Tic Tacs when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got home with it, she's like, where'd you get those? I'm like, oh, I took it from the store. She's like, you took them? I was like 4, 5. And so she brought me back to the store, embarrassed me in front of the entire store. And I had to say, I stole these, I'm sorry. And ever since then, I never stole anything. And I'm really glad that happened. And then when I do dumb shit like that, where I wasn't stealing a tomato, but I was being deceptive about it, it was like immediate, like, Michael, you should have known better. And so, but that's my own experience with it. You know what I mean? So I don't know what that means, but that's kind of like the odd experiences part of like what you're asking in line with all of this stuff. And so when I see people with the victim mentality, I understand it, I sympathize, but that's never really going to change your life in a positive way if you keep doing that, and that's my frustration with a lot of that stuff. And kind of
Well, that's definitely my experience too. I mean, in lots of ways, it kind of goes into like, I don't want to say law of attraction because I find it to be a very shallow understanding of the reality in lots of ways. But whatever I kind of put out is what I get back in some ways. And whatever I focus on is really what will materialize, I guess. So if I focus on being a victim, I'm going to be continually victimized by myself in some way. And I'm programming myself to put myself in that position more and more by believing in that mentality, I guess. And it's like early on in recovery when I started to take responsibility for my own part and stuff and my own taking responsibility for my part in my own misery, I started to get like these really awesome experiences and opportunities that opened me up and like exposed me to a different avenue of life. Like getting to speak about my experiences to people, like, and having people actually resonate with my story and being like, oh wow, like that's what it's like to be psychotic, or that's what it's like to be on the other end of things, or like, and it's something that I'm passionate about because there's so much stigma associated with mental illness or addiction or stuff like that. So it's weird. when I was a victim, people looked at me like a victim. And then when I'm on the side of like taking responsibility for my part and being vulnerable about those experiences, people can see the strength in that. And they don't view me as like some superhero or something. They just view me as like, wow, that's awesome that you can be there. And it's like, so I kind of attract whatever I think, but deeper than the law of attraction, I guess.
Yeah, and then people get to see somebody who had similar mindsets and was able to at least break free with it to a certain degree. And it is inspirational as long as there's, as long as you keep I think a humble viewpoint on it, and you're not being holier than thou. You're just like, hey, this is my experience. This is what worked for me. This is what didn't.
Mm-hmm.
That might work or not work for you. And to me, like the other thing about the victim thing is like, when I was talking about that girl who had like the sexual molestation, it's like, that to me is a real fucking victim.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just like, it's not that you're never victimized and everything that comes back to you is because it was your fault, but at least consider that mindset to see what hand could I have played in this coming back to bite me. And if you can be honest and be like, I don't really see any reason why, then, you got to make a choice. Like, well, what do I do about that? Do I try to make a documentary about my struggle, or do you just deal with it? And, I feel like it's so strange to say, but I feel like good intentions and like people's like oppression is like actually the number one weapon for the people like fucking ruling this world. It's like they are so good at taking activism and molding it to their will. And I think that people involved in those things, it's not that you can't be an activist and do good things, but you still got to be careful, like what is really allowing your voice to be heard with certain things. Like if you have a parade that has CNN coverage and there's some group with like part of some corporation handing out picket signs to you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, here you go. Get up there. Have you ever seen the movie PCU?
It's been a while, but I think I have seen it.
It's a pretty funny commentary on like that. Like it's a 90s movie and it's a dumb movie. It's like a college humor movie about and partying and shit. But in some weird way, like, again, I'm not one of these people who disown stuff like that's out in the media. It's just, I think there's some good social commentary in that movie, even though it is about Jon Favreau getting stoned with dreadlocks and like hanging out with you know what I mean? Like, and like, a bunch of the kind of dumb stuff, but like same thing with like South Park. I think one of my favorite episodes was when they did the election episode on you're voting for a giant douche or a turd sandwich. Everyone's arguing, and like they have their picket sign, giant douche, turd sandwich. Like, I think it's Stan who like, dude, I don't know why I have to pick. And I think like Puff Daddy gets involved because he had like the vote or die thing. He's like, yo, vote or die, bitch. And he's like, okay, I vote for turd sandwich. And the other guy's like, wait a second, you're voting for turd sandwich? No, you got to vote for giant douche. He's like, well, you told me I could vote for whoever I wanted. It's like, no, if you vote for giant douche, you're an asshole. Like, it was like just all of this great commentary on people's political behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And it is really funny, like how that is like out there in a show. And, there's, again, like to me, I'm going to find that profound. I don't care if like Comedy Central's owned by the Illuminati or whatever. Like I resonate with that. And I think if people took that mindset more where it's just like, you need to be a strong enough person to be like, hey, even if this comes from the so-called enemy, like I can still use these things as inspiration, but you use something negative in a positive way. And I do think that that's a great philosophy. And that's what I liked about, your questions and watching some of your other videos, where if you don't adopt that mindset, I think you're going to be in trouble in life. You're going to have a lot more struggles than you need to because you're going to get stuck in patterns, and it's fucking hard. And, sometimes you need some extra help from, some divine guidance or whatever. People can figure out what they want about that sort of thing. But I don't think you necessarily have to like talk about that stuff to just create positive change. And, for me, like over the course of all this, I've really had more of an appreciation, understanding for the idea of like God and what that means to me, but it's a personal definition.
Mm-hmm.
I don't try to tell people that my definition of that is what they should believe. It's just that I'm not going to lie that there is something going on where I feel like there's some things that are personally tailored to my life where I can manifest things within my own realm to the best of my ability. And I feel like that is something that is true where you can create your own reality, but I don't think that you're still confined to certain limitations.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of people, that's where I kind of don't jump on board with a lot of like the quote unquote new agey stuff. It's like, I've tried to be in that mindset and it's never worked for me. Now, that's my personal experience. And that's why I think things are tailored to each person individually in different ways, where certain things that I'm limited to, other people might not have any problem with it. And that's what's interesting to me about astrology, where, again, I found some very profound things in it, whether or not it's legitimate or not, whether it's like a Rorschach test and I'm just assimilating things in my mind based on archetypes, or if there is actually something to it. I don't know. To me, it still has been profound either way, and I don't expect anybody else to do it. I've never like pushed it on people.
Mm-hmm.
I just said, hey, I found some correlations that if I'm being an honest person, man, that's really accurate and weird. Now, why it is, I don't know. And if somebody else looks at their birth chart and they don't think that it's accurate at all, then that's fine. Like, I don't care. And when I talk with people about it, that's one of the things my entire life, people look at me like I have two heads when I've talked about astrology. Not in a way of telling people it's real. I'm just my own personal thing. And they're just like, look at me like it's this sad look like, oh my God, like you've been duped. Don't you know science has disproven it? And it's just like, well, if you look at all this science and the esoteric philosophies running it, they all are obsessed with astrology in different ways. So, and they like to keep these things hidden from the profane. So it's very interesting when you go down that road. But, you know, to me, I think it's because for the most part, I'm a pretty grounded, skeptical person. And I think that people kind of know me as that. So when they see me talking about these things, it weirds them out. Whereas if like my general essence was just somebody who floated through life and just, you know, everything's magical and whimsical, not there's anything wrong with having that mindset. But if that was kind of that kind of person, they probably would be like, you know, whatever. But since like I'm always like criticizing things and kind of like a buzzkill about all, like, you know, if I watch a movie with people, I can't help but like pick out all the things wrong with it. And everyone's like, oh, it's the best movie ever. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, that is so much of how I am. And I'm like really just down to earth about a lot of things. I think when I start talking about those things, people are like, whoa, what is going on? Like they don't know me in that mindset. But like, to me, I'm doing what I've always done and just being honest about stuff. And I could be wrong about things, but from what I understand, I just have to be honest that this makes sense to me, or this has had some sort of application. So, you know, that's one thing that has actually helped me have a lot more sympathy for other people's situations, because if things are indeed tailored astrologically to everybody else, then that's why I like some viewpoints in Christianity where it's like, you don't leave the judgment up to other people in an all-encompassing sense. That's up to a higher power. I think when you take that viewpoint, you feel so much better. And what's ironic is I see a lot of people in the Orthodox Christian community not doing that at all.
Yeah.
And not to shit on people, but like, you know, that's the negative stereotype of it, where there's a lot of people that I've met that take that viewpoint that have been very cool about that kind of stuff. But so many are just like, you're being satanic. They come up with all these stories about people they don't even know, especially in Hollywood and stuff, and be like, they've made a blood sacrifice pact with Satan and they sacrificed their girlfriend for fame. And I'm just like, what are you talking about? This is how it works because some Illuminati insider said how it worked. I'm just like, well, maybe somebody just came out and just is crazy and made that shit. Like, you don't fucking know these things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's the stuff that really like turns me off to that. And I think that those are the things that have actually been orchestrated by the other side of things to keep people away from things that are real and like, you know, the truther movement. So that's my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff is like so skewed. One of the things for me is like I used to be like one of them people like magically floating through life and stuff like that. Like there was a time where I quit my job when I lived down in the Keys, and I tried to move to Key West like homeless, and I was like, the universe got me, man. The universe is going to support me on this drunken bender move to Key West while I'm homeless. And then like as I'm sitting there like destitute and hungover in like a like a crappy hotel room, I'm like, oh man, the universe didn't get me. And now when I look on it, it's like, no. That's me applying magical thinking and putting my own will in a situation and assuming that that will is what a higher power has for me. Like, which I think a lot of people get wrapped up in that.
And the universe still did get you, just not in the way you thought it did.
Yeah, that's very true as well. I'm still alive, and I actually learned a very valuable lesson from it. And I have a good story of like how not to do things in tune with the universe.
And, you know, to me, it's like, that doesn't mean that other people can't do that and just pick up and go and move into a city and all of a sudden find housing and everything's great. That's the strange thing about it, where it's like, growing up, you have this programming that everyone can be president, everyone can be an astronaut, everyone can be an NBA star if you just work hard enough. And that's not to downplay hard work, but there is some sort of delusional mindset about all of that, in my opinion. And this is what's interesting again with astrology. It's like I have a butt ton of Saturn in my chart, and that's about like limitations and structures and having to do things properly before you can break free of those.
Mm-hmm.
And have a lot of that going on. And so part of it was when I just sort of learned to accept certain limitations, it allowed me to really cultivate things within that and actually become really good at certain things, you know? And, and it just, I think people want to kind of rebel against certain things that maybe they feel like they deserve to be above, but they actually really just haven't done the work with certain things to actually understand things from a fundamental level. And I don't have to take this to some magical place, like learning guitar. You know, that was a huge experience for me with sheer willpower. And I always loved music growing up, and I was very like good at visualizing certain elements of it, but I was very terrible with the natural talent for it. I had a terrible ear with like, I still have not the greatest ear. Like, I'm much better at it, like listening to something and like being able to like figure out the notes. Like I'm better at that, but I have a good ear for certain things, but some things was just terrible. So really it was me just sitting down and just be like, okay, if I put the amount of hours that I put into playing video games, which was something I was naturally good at, which really doesn't get you a lot in life. And girls love guys who play video games, right? So I'm like, okay, I'm really fucking good at these. So maybe if I just spent the amount of time on that on guitar, even if I'm not good, I'm not naturally talented, by law of just simple logic, I should get good at it. Mm-hmm. And I really had to approach it from a very simple mindset where I just had to be like, I am an idiot. And I'm just trying to figure out how to get one finger to the next fret without completely screwing up, which is not sexy. It's not glamorous. You're sitting there for hours and hours just going, how do I do this? And that was my one experience where, you know, I used to smoke pot a bit when I was younger, and it was very different for me smoking than a lot of other people's experiences, where I would not get hungry. I would get very talkative, animated. I would be engaged. I would stay up all night. My mind was race. I was not relaxed. Mm-hmm. But it could be cool, but I would just be talking about all these things and all these thoughts just coming into my head. And it was just like, everyone else was just like, dude. Yeah. And I would just like, I didn't want to be like that. And it was cool because I did have those silly moments where we were laughing about things and whatever, but like, that's what really, like, I would sit there and smoke and just try to figure out guitar. And I did get a lot of positive things about that, but then that drifted into a very negative thing where I became very nihilistic. I became very pessimistic. I became kind of like suicidal in my mindset. Like I hated life. And it went down a very dark path. And that's when I was like, okay, I need to quit this. And since then, I've never really gone back to it. But at least there was a benefit of it where it helped me analyze how to get better at guitar. And so that was one of those things where I had to learn a lot of discipline, a lot of structure.
Mm-hmm.
And when I just applied myself to it, thinking, okay, there's a lot of things in my life at this point in time where I was in college and I hated it because it was nothing like what you're promised it would be. I was just a hermit in my room. I wasn't out partying, even though my late high school years, I was partying with my friends, because it was very different partying with friends in a small town versus at college, where it's just a completely different thing. And I went to a bigger school. So I was just completely isolated from all that. And I just spent all this time doing it. And it didn't realize the goals that I wanted to be in the end. But that's really what actually helped me balance kind of my brain out, because you're forced to look at both sides of your hands. And it is like alchemy. I've talked about this in a couple of videos where you have to put each hand on an opposite and get it to do something opposite. But then you have to unify them in a way that's harmonious, where one opposite isn't screwing up another one. And so the better you can balance that out, the better you'll be at it. So, after many, 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 many hours of doing that, I found that I naturally just got smarter about things. Not in like a way of like, I just noticed like how my reading comprehension went up without anything. I would just read things and I would just start understanding things so much better. And it was great because I was always so terrible at like reading. I would read through a page and I'm like, oh, dude, like I zoned out. Like, what the hell I didn't absorb any of it.
Mm-hmm.
And no amount of schooling was going to get me through reading and getting me better at it than learning an instrument, because I think you're really dealing with parts of your brain that, man, it sucks, like activating them. You get this moment of frustration where you're like, my head's going to explode. Like there's a certain feeling you have when you're like learning something new and it's like new and it's like feels good, but at the same time it's like, ah. And going through a lot of that, it just was so much more naturally helpful for a lot of other things in my life. And if I hadn't had the mental fortitude to do that, I don't know where I'd be. But at the same time, I had to have that awful experience of college where I just hated everything around me. And I was just put in a dorm room. It was a triple. And I had bought a bass originally. And I lived with a kid who had a bass guitar. And he had a tuner. And I never thought to go out and buy a tuner. I'm like, oh, I can tune it now. And from there, I was just like, well, this is here in my room. This is my limitations. I'm limited to this small dorm room. I don't want to leave it. I don't really like anybody else. I did go out and play basketball and sports and stuff. But like for the most part, I was just like, I was confined to what I had, and I just tried to learn some discipline. And man, it really panned out for a lot of things, even though my grandiose dreams about becoming a rock star did not pan out. I do have to owe everything. Like I wouldn't have been able to do something like the series that I did without going through that and having the discipline to look at a lot of details and having the mental, like it is to me, it's just like, you're just activating your brain. And I feel like a lot of people can get better and smarter about things. It's just, you have to go through some really uncomfortable situations where even reading this esoteric literature, I had to look up so many words. I felt stupid.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay, what does that word mean? I know I've seen it before and I think I might know what it is, but I really don't know what it is. And if I was going to tell somebody I don't know what that word means, I'd be embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to look it up anyways. And so you really have to like embarrass yourself that on these very fundamental childlike things. But when you do that, you build this foundation that like all of a sudden, once you get to a certain point, all these other things start clicking. And maybe if you hadn't built up that foundation from the start, even though it was embarrassing and it was like kind of like, it was like this humbling experience, it does benefit you better in the end. So that's kind of where I've been at with it. And then the idea of like Saturn in astrology is just very strange to me in terms of its relativeness to my life.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I wanted to say about astrology was like, I always think it's funny how people don't believe that planets could have any impact on people, but yet the moon affects the ocean. So like the moon can pull the ocean, but no, these other bodies could have no effect on little old us. Like, and I mean, for me, there are things that have synced up as far as like, learning from negative experiences, discipline and humility. That was such a difficult thing for me in lots of ways. Like I had tried to play guitar when I was younger, and I actually learned how to do it. Like started to learn how to do it, I should say, one summer, smoking a lot of hash on the beach in Northern California. but like I didn't have the discipline to really digest a lot of it. And the time when I practiced more also kind of came from isolation, because it's really one of those things where you just need to be there with you. And I'm still not to a level that I was at it, but honestly, I've gotten better since I've been in recovery, because I've been able to get humble and be like, some of the things I know aren't the correct way to do it. I need to develop that more. And it really is, I forget if it's Sun Tzu or Lao Tzu who says that turn your, turn problems into opportunities or something like that. So through all the things I've been through and not being disciplined, I guess I shouldn't say not disciplined. I was disciplined to do things that were very destructive in my life. Like getting high all the time and being an alcoholic and living like that lifestyle. It takes a lot of discipline to put yourself through that much torture, I guess. And it's like, one of the quotes that I always laugh about when I think about like me learning guitar or learning how to paint or learning how to do anything, it's a Peter Griffin quote from Family Guy. And he's like trying to learn the guitar and he's like, anything I'm not instantly good at isn't worth my time. And that's really how I used to think.
There was one of those with like Homer Simpson too. As much as programming there is in those shows, again, you look at a very terrible quote, but you can still adhere to that mindset where it's like, it's like something to the effect of like, it's not worth doing anything because there's always going to be a million people better at it than you. Like that was like a Homer Simpson quote to like his daughter about like not trying to like pursue anything. And, you know, it is funny having that mindset and it sucks. And I've been in those mindsets because I was a partier with a lot of things too during certain phases of my life. Like I was like one of those people who would binge play Beirut and go throw up in the corner and get back on the table and keep playing. Like, you know, it's just like, but I was always actually a very happy drunk when I was younger. I was like that guy who's like, man, I fucking love you. You're awesome. You know what I mean? Like I was that person. And then once I started to lose that drinking, kind of like when smoking pot, when I started losing a lot of the things that, granted, it wasn't good, the amount that I was doing, it's still, I had a certain amount of my own spirit that came out that I felt good about. But then when that started turning to a certain level of darkness, I was like, man, I gotta stop, you know? And it's hard because when you get that destructiveness, sometimes you go through these things. Like I went through a phase where kind of like, basically it was the ending of a relationship that, again, I was kind of playing a victim, a part of it, where some things happened that I still feel like I didn't deserve, but I had a big hand in creating that person's anger to go do those things. Mm-hmm. And I was sort of like, okay, I'm at fault a little bit here, but what she did was way worse. And that mentality really, that was one of the big moments in my life where it screwed everything up. And I actually ended up getting all this nerve damage in my arms in my mid-20s, and I couldn't play guitar for like a year and a half. I had all these surgeries and stuff. And it was a very, very terrible time. And I was very self-destructive. And when your mind is self-destructing and your conceptions about what you thought about things, like, oh, this person could never do this to me and whatever, you start to manifest it physically. And that's when like when I'm in that mode and I'm like out of control, like I'll just chain smoke cigarettes like crazy. Like I'll smoke like a pack a day and not even think twice about it. And I won't eat. I'll get really thin and disgusting. Mm-hmm. You know, it's weird because it is a reflection of your metaphysical state of consciousness. And there is something strange to me about like addictions to certain things like smoking cigarettes, where it's like, part of it is you just don't give a shit and you're saying, fuck it, and I'm just going to self-destruct. And another part of it, like cigarettes for me was like a lot of things. It was like, some of it was sort of like trying to be cool, like that musician that doesn't give a shit. And then I started to realize that programming, and I was like, okay, once you realize that I'm just doing this to some percentage of it to be sort of cool, even though that was kind of a lower percentage, I at least like kind of eliminated that from it. And then another thing is when you're working on the line cook and you go out back to have a break and everyone else is smoking a cigarette, and you just feel like this helps me identify with everybody. So maybe I'll only smoke when I take breaks with my employees. Mm-hmm. There's all these different weird mental things that go on with you when you're drinking or smoking or anything like that. But once you become aware of the reasons you do it, you can make a conscious choice, be like, well, I know this is why I do it, but fuck it. I'm just going to do it because I don't really know what else to do. Or, man, this is so dumb why I'm doing this. And then that was actually able to make me quit cold turkey in a lot of things. And so once I had those health problems, I realized, like, you know what? I'm self-destructing. And I have a choice to just go down with the ship. And I was very suicidal at that point in my life. I was just constantly thinking about killing myself, like, every day. And all these different ways I would want to do it. And things like, you know, should I leave a note to my family? Should I do it at home? What if my family finds me? And I don't want to do that to them. And then I just realized, like, dude, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, this is the worst thing you could do. Like, imagine the trauma you're going to put your family on, you know? It's like, you're given these choices and these extreme moments, and it's just like, okay, what am I doing that's not good that will help me out of this? And I had to quit drinking and quit smoking cold turkey. And it was kind of ironic. It was like a New Year's Eve where that happened, where I was going to go out to a party and I was working late at the restaurant, and I was so mad because we kept getting all these customers coming in at the end of the night. And I'm just like, dude, fuck these people. Like, they're coming to this shitty restaurant on New Year's Eve. Why are they, you know, you get so negative about it. and then I realized, like, you know what? I'm just going to go home and go to bed. It's too late to go at this party. And then I woke up and I was just like, man, that was one of the best New Year's I had, because I don't feel hungover. And I'm just like, as cheesy as it is, like a New Year's resolution, like, okay, I got to change things. Like, this is not good. And so from then on, I started, like, I used to eat terribly too. I used to, like, eat Taco Bell every day. And slowly that went to, like, frozen dinners that seemed healthy because they had them. And so little by little, and that changed. That's one of those traumatic negative experiences that I was able to make positive, because it was sink or swim at that point. And so I just completed cold turkey, quit drinking, quit smoking. And it was a very long process going through my arm issues. And I was in a lot of pain because of them. And I was always projecting that blame on my ex-girlfriend. And over time, being able to be forgiving to somebody that really hurt you a lot, but because you realize that part of it was a reflection of your own doing. And that's the hardest thing in the world, man, you know? And
yeah, I definitely do know.
Yeah. So long story short, I still would go out to people, like, who are drinking. I'd go out to bars. I just wouldn't be drinking. And it was very profound, because I would look around me and realize that, you know what, I was a part of this. I was out there getting shit-faced and laughing it up. So I'm not going to be judgmental about it. And I would just be the person that would drive people. But if I wanted to go home, I would go home, be like, dude, you got to get your own ride home, or I'm going now. And what I found out was very interesting from a psychological mode of analyzing people, and myself too. I would notice that I'd be in a crowd of like 5 or 6 people at a loud bar, and I'd hear somebody I knew, or maybe knew a little bit, like, oh yeah, I'm going to do a shot. And they'd be like, dude, I love drinking. Like, man, this is the best. They'd be going on and on about how partying was awesome. And I'm like, okay, you know, I'm just chilling here. And then I go over to the bar and get a drink of water. And the guy would come up and be like, oh, hey, Mike, what are you drinking? And I'm like, oh, I'm just drinking water. He's like, oh, why? And I'm like, well, I'm quitting drinking because I don't like who I become when I drink. And so for my own personal reasons, I just need to not do it. And that person 5 minutes earlier in the group was saying how they love drinking. It was like their favorite thing to do. They don't know what they do without it. Was looked at me and it's like, you know what? I've been thinking like I shouldn't be drinking. Like I've been thinking like maybe this isn't good for me. And to me, that was like the most real moment I got out of them, versus you're in the group and it's scary because you're so used to this lifestyle with like these people you hang out with. And you're worried that if I don't drink, am I still going to like these people? Are they still going to like me? You know, and that's a weird thing. And that's what, when I stopped smoking pot, I just realized that like I stopped hanging out with a lot of people that I did have some very personal connections with before, but then, and you know, it's not that I disown them or anything like that. It's just, you're just not on the same wavelength anymore. And I have a lot of people that I grew detached from, and I didn't like the path they went, but that's where they went. And I would still love to see them and hang out with them and talk with them today. But you get to these crossroads, you know, you got to make a decision one way or the other, but it's very strange how no matter what, you kind of still get brought back to these places, but you might end up going through a lot more destruction than you actually need to based on your mindset.
No, totally, man. I mean, I can definitely relate. I really had to disconnect from a lot of people when I stopped partying. And I had been to bars a couple times prior to this attempt at not drinking, where I wasn't drinking. And for me, it was somewhat terrifying to see how people acted when they were drunk, because I knew that I was like 10 times worse than that when I got drunk. Like I would get blackout drunk almost every time I did. So I'm like, these people are mild and they're irritating the crap out of me. Like, um, one of the things I've found is that when you kind of step away from that stuff, people that really identify with it, it makes them uncomfortable sometimes. Like, especially when I was younger, like different guy friends be like, "Oh, you don't want to drink anymore, you pussy," or like all this stuff, and it's like, why is me, why is my choice that like profound to you? Like, why does it have such a big impact? Because it's almost people wanting you to commiserate with them.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
it's weird, man.
And some part of it is they probably also think that you're judging them. Like, oh yeah, you're not drinking now, Mr. High and Mighty. And it's easy to become like that. And that's another thing that I tried very hard not to do when like I quit smoking. And I would see, because that's the problem. You see these destructive patterns for yourself. And then when you don't participate in them, you're so much more aware about how they're destroying other people. And it's very hard to be like, well, do I feel obligated? Should I intervene? What should I do here? But no matter what, people make a choice to do those things on their own. It's like the person who says, I'm trying to quit smoking. And then they get drunk and they're like, oh, dude, let me bum a cigarette. You're like, no,
Yeah.
no, you grab it and you throw it down. You're like, you're not going to do that. It's just like, dude, they had the thought, they were going to do it, whether or not you pulled it out of their mouth or not. That's not going to solve anything. You can tell them like, man, really? Like you can voice your opinion to them, but don't try to force it. And I think that that's like something that's really tough when people are like addicted to things. And I haven't had addictions to the level that like I know a lot of other people have, and it sounds like that, you know, your experiences have. And so I don't really have a great, you know, vantage point to say these things, but like unfortunately people are going to do what they're going to do, and voice your concerns about it, but at the end of the day they're responsible for themselves. And you know, unfortunately a lot of people are still there for you to pick up the pieces when you destroy things for yourself, and that's caring for people, unfortunately. You know, even
Yeah.
their lives up, you're still there for them. And that's something that I learned from my dad a lot. You know, when my parents got divorced, they ended up getting back together at the end before she died. And I never understood that, because I was like, man, you know, like I was really happy it happened, but at the same time I was just like, with my experiences with women relationships, I would be like, fuck that, you know what I mean? And then I really had to learn from that to be like, that was really strength what he did, versus for a time in life I saw it as weakness. And that's the way I look at things very differently now. I view strength and weaknesses as very different in certain cases, especially with like forgiving people and stuff like that.
No, I can relate to that too. I mean, my parents never got back together, but like at a point, my dad viewed things differently, and at least like their divorce was very toxic. There was a time where he just kind of moved on, and like I don't know. Throughout life, I feel like my perception on how I treated women was vastly different. I used to either be like really clingy or like very destroyed when things wouldn't work out. And in my last serious relationship, it was after I had my mental health stuff, and her and I broke up, and I like couldn't even talk to her. Her and I are friends now, even though she lives across the country, and it's like we're on good terms. Last summer, I tried to get into a relationship, and that didn't work out, and her and I kind of stopped talking for a long time. It's actually one of the things that led me into recovery. But it's like we're friends now, and I got to see what caring for somebody else in addiction was like when I was clean, when I wasn't using. Holy shit, dude. And it was like surreal for me to see just a very small segment of how I treated everybody else I cared about. And it really opened up my eyes to a lot of behavior that I did. And like the hardest thing about addiction is, like you said, people kind of have to see it for themselves or whatever. And it's like, I had tried to do it for my parents, like to get clean. I had tried to do it for courts where I would end up in juvenile justice centers from using. I tried to do it to keep women in my life. And until it came to a point where I legitimately wanted to do it for me, because that female friend walked away, like there was a point about a month into my clean time this time where she kind of fell out of my life. And it's like, I could have easily went back out, but this time it was for me. And it was so much different. I'll say this, like people think that using is easier and, or whatever, like, oh, those people, they're just escaping reality. It's like a lot of people don't understand the hell that those people are living in daily and constantly pursuing, I guess. It's surreal, man.
Yeah, I hear you. And, you know, I've had interesting experiences where I have had certain friends in my life. I don't want to say they're like my best friends, but like people that I have had a few people that have like always struggled with like addiction issues, with whether it be drugs or you know, some other things. And it's weird because I've never been addicted to like hard drugs. I've actually rarely done any hard drugs, and I'm glad that I didn't. You know, the biggest thing I ever did was like mushrooms a few times.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, that's another thing that kind of concerns me in the truther movement is there's like a lot of these people who are really gung-ho on spiritual ascension through drugs. And I'm not saying like that's a decision you have to make on your own, where I don't think it's some blanket thing you could say, hey man, if you do these mushrooms, it'll change your life and it'll be great. And I think that's the worst advice you could give to anybody in this all-encompassing sense, where it needs to be an individual situation, and you need to understand their personality. And I think that's a slippery slope with that kind of stuff. And so I can say that I have had positive experiences with particular substances.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, I've had very, very negative ones. And sometimes I'll get in conversations with people who will like, I'll be walking out in the park and some people will be smoking pot, and they'll look at me because I look like a guy who would smoke pot, right? So,
yeah.
just, you know, it's fine. That's a stereotype. Like, it makes sense. Of course. Like, and so I'm just like, no, I'm good. And thank you though. And they will like ask me about it. And I'm like, oh, well, you know, I can get very nihilistic and very deeply depressed and very just, I can really, a lot of ugly things will come out of me sometimes. And not to say that maybe it wouldn't now, like, I don't know, but it's, I don't have any reason to.
Mm-hmm.
And it is funny because they kind of look at you like they've never had that experience with it. And, you know, so I don't know the reasons why that is. You know, sometimes I think that people do glorify marijuana, like nothing bad can come from it. So that's like their way of glazing over anything that comes from it that's bad. Or maybe they just haven't had any problems with it. Like I'm not in a position to judge anybody else, but man, I like some of the darkest times in my life were, you know, being stoned in my room when I really was like, dude, I need to get out of this. And, you know, but that, to me, it's all a reflection of your internal being, you know, like that's what drugs do. They enhance whatever's going on with you at the moment. And so if you're super happy and you get drunk, you're probably going to be pretty super happy. If you have things that have been repressed, that's why you get some people who are just like, dude, where'd that come from with them? Like, or I have had friends that like all of a sudden, like when they drink, they get really sketchy around girls. And I'm like, I'm almost kind of like afraid, like, dude, don't cross, like they never did, but like you're concerned that maybe they would cross a line. And I'm just like, this is weird. I don't know this person like this.
Yeah.
And so I dealt with a lot of that growing up, especially like when you talk about relationships with women. Like, I guess, like I said, growing up and having my mother die when I was younger, it made me grow up really quickly in certain ways. And in a lot of ways, I was still a kid, and I like dumb shit and laughing at fart jokes and stuff like that. But like, you know, and I still do.
Yeah, me too.
But you know, it's like I guess what drove me nuts is like I'm hanging out with my buddies who I have really good, comfortable relationships with, and with certain ones, as soon as girls enter the picture, it was like they were a different person. So how can I be comfortable when my buddy is like, I don't even know who this person is? And the only reason they're acting like this is because they want to impress this girl or whatever. And then I just see my guy friends like acting like more, it could go both ways. They will try to put other people down to seem cool, or they'll be like super sensitive, like they want to get girls by being this little like sensitive teddy bear. And I'm just like, it's like, there's nothing wrong with being sensitive, and there's nothing wrong with being like, you know, telling it like it is. But when you're doing it for alternative motives, that's when it's going to come out. And I'm just like, and so me being me, I'm like, well, I don't feel comfortable because everyone around me is changing. And it's like, they're not even being who they are, who I know them.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just withdraw. And that was my, like, the thing I did.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in a social situation that I wasn't comfortable with, I would just analyze everything that was going on, because for me, it was like, I don't like this. So how do I figure out what are the things that made it this way? So I'd be like, and I'd start analyzing people and like different things I'd get from people. And that was really like something I think that I've just naturally always done. And it's been helpful because whenever I was in charge of throwing a party or something like that, I'm like, okay, what are the things that breed that? And let me not do that. You know?
Yeah, right.
And one of them is having the music way too fucking loud. I can't stand it. Like, I'm a musician and I hate it when the music's so loud because you can't have any personal conversations with people.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what drove me nuts about being out in the bar and I hear Sweet Caroline for the millionth fucking time and everyone's like, bah, 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 and it's just like, but like people seem to love it. And I'm just like, but the thing was, if I went into a bar with my friends and we started out the night there and it was kind of quiet and I was able to like, it's almost like weird. There's all these weird social metaphysical dynamics going on at these places where if you get to build up the vibe there yourself, I think that you naturally attract things to you and you're able to like kind of affect the environment around you. But if you walk into a bar at 11 o'clock at night and it's just like a clusterfuck and they're like, oh dude, I can't deal with all this. Like everything that's going around me is just like ridiculous. And so that's kind of the way I viewed a lot of that stuff in like the partying days, where it's like, if I was in an instance where I could kind of shape what was going on around me and I felt like I could be myself, I felt like it was cool because I was able to bring other people out of their like shells in a way where like they didn't feel like they could say something and everyone's going to be like, would you say more? You know what I mean? Like they weren't, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
When it was those instances, man, I felt great. I was like super high about everything. And it's unfortunate because as I've gotten older, those things are fewer and fewer and farther in between. And I think that a lot of it has to do with the way things are going with technology and impersonal behavior. And it's sad to me because it's really difficult because I'm always wanting that to come back, but it just doesn't seem like it is. And not to be morose or depressed about it, but like I have to adjust and like, you know, I guess that's part of the reason why time led me into looking at all of this esoteric alternative truther stuff. That was something that was kind of forced upon me. And then looking at that worldview, all these things that I had noticed in my life, just immediately, it's like a light bulb goes off and it illuminates all these things that you've been noticing your entire life. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is the reason, this is what's going on. You have just a better general sense of what all that is really doing. And then from there, it's like a whole different world moving into that. So that's just the path that it's been. And, you know, I know it's getting kind of long. You probably got to get on with your day, but I guess I can probably like wrap it up with that's where I'm at now, you know, from growing up to now. And I can honestly say that I'm really not any different a person than I was when I was like 5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
But there's lots of things that have tried to take me away from that.
Yeah.
And it really, those fundamental core things that I've always been like, when I just revert back to them, what happens is that's like the macro, the big picture part of yourself. But the more you adhere to that foundation, the more you're blown away by the details of all of those things manifesting around you. And the older you get, it's just like infinitely expanding with all the details of these dynamics that work. But if you understand a lot of the fundamental principles of stuff, like the way the esoteric occultists work, like that's the reason I've been able to make 80 videos and do 50 hours of material, because the fundamental concepts are actually pretty simple, but that is what they try to steer you away from. Mm-hmm. It's really crazy. And so I'm hoping that that's what I wanted to do in the series, is reaffirm that this is the principles and look at all the ways it manifests. Isn't it crazy? Now, the crazy thing is, what does that mean to you? You know?
Yeah, that's an awesome way to put it on people. And you have a YouTube that I can put the link in the description for people to check out your work, right? And do you have any other
Yeah, I'll just send you
website or anything?
no, this YouTube's it. The Occult Science series playlist, that's what I'd recommend people looking at. And it is very different than me talking now. Like me, I'm able to finally like express some opinions and be like emotional about shit. Whereas in the series, I'm trying to be like, okay, I really hate talking about this viewpoint, but I'm going to try to do it justice. Or I really want people to think this way about this viewpoint, but I'm not going to push them into that. And so I have to like hold back on a lot of things. But I feel like that's for a better purpose. And so I feel fortunate that I've been able to do that. I think just having all of those perspectives and mindsets of other people has allowed me to at least do that to where I feel like, okay, I did the best I could with all of this stuff. And if other people think it's crazy or think I'm out to left field with stuff or think that I should make more ironclad statements about these things, you know, whatever. People are going to think what they're going to think.
Yeah.
I can feel good about it that I did the best I could, and there it is. So.
No, I think that's awesome, man. I just want to say thank you for taking the time to chat with me. I really enjoyed the conversation and hearing your perspective on things. It was something I was looking forward to, and it was definitely well worth taking the time to talk to you and everything like that, man. I thought it was great.
Well, thank you for reaching out, and you know, I do like talking with people who have like, you know, emailed me about the series and stuff like that, and I've gotten some pretty personal conversations through email, and it's tough because I don't have a lot of time, so it's really hard to write these, you know, and I have a lot to say on things, so I'll end up writing like these 3-page emails to people about stuff, and that's just the nature of who I am. I can't, it's a miracle. All the videos in the series are 20 to 40 minutes, give or take. I think the average is somewhere around 22, 23 minutes per video. It took a lot of restraint to make it that way because that's just my natural way of being. And sometimes even know that your strengths can really, like I can be bogged down in details, and that's my biggest weakness is just get lost in these things. And but it is a strength, and so you have to understand when you're going into it's becoming a curse, when you're becoming a blessing. And I think moving forward, I'm going to get away from a lot of this research stuff. I might go back to it at some point. I don't know, but I have toyed with the notion of trying to get into more of the idea of being like professional astrologer, but making it a lot more affordable and a lot more options with it, and not make it so make it more practical and I don't know, because I've read a lot about astrology and listened to people talk about it, and you know, there's sometimes where I feel like it gets a little bit too grandiose and magical. Not that things aren't magical, but in a way that I just think is detached from reality. That's my viewpoint on it. And I'm not, and like, you know, if anybody else wants to be like that, that's fine. But it's, again, it's like, okay, this is what I don't want to do. If that's what they're going to do, that's fine. But for me personally, I'm just molding it to my own understanding of it. And I'm hoping that it will resonate with some people. And I have done a few things for people emailing me, asking me about it. And, you know, I've gotten some mixed results where they're just like, okay, thanks for the info, but I'm just confused about it. And some people are like, oh, wow, that's been really, really helpful, or really. And so I need some more practice with it. And I want to take it to a level where you got to be careful, like, because I've been in that position where you're looking to people for like spiritual information. And I don't even really want to think of it that way too much, but like, because some people are looking for like all the answers, and I don't want to be like some fucking guru person that's like viewed that way. Like, I don't want people to like view you as like, oh, this guy seems like he might know what he's talking about, so I'm just gonna, I want to try to do it where like, this is what this says about it from what I know about astrology. Now you can think that that's bullshit or profound or whatever. You figure out what you want to do with that information. I'm not going to tell you what it means, because I value people to think for themselves about this stuff. And so that's a direction I'm thinking about going to, just because, again, one of those things that, not my first choice to try to sit there and do esoteric research all day or do astrology, but it seems to be something that I've been put into, that maybe that's a byproduct of of trying to do the right thing, and maybe that's something that will create something I can do and at least have some sort of financial success with it, but feel good about like I'm not ripping people off. Like if I was paying for this, I would be happy with it. Because it's a very fine line with all this stuff, like the fucking money example. You know, I'm not going to go on a tangent on this, but anybody who's in this, like any alternative research or spirituality and stuff like that, you struggle with the idea, even being a musician, you struggle with the idea of like, well, now I got to sell something or now I got to get paid for it. How do I feel about that? And I'm one of those people who are like, I just feel so weird about charging money for things. But unfortunately, like I'm not one of those people, if like somebody does alternative research and they charge for something, like I'm not going to demonize them for it. And even if they're doing it in a way that, well, I don't know if I'd charge for that, but I'm not in that situation. So you got to do with what you can. But I also ask people to, when you sit there doing 5-6 hours of research every day and your vision's shot and you're drinking way too much coffee and my legs are cramping up, you know, and people are like, you made $5 off this, you're a shill or something. Like, you know, it's just like the way I look at it. I've listened to podcasts that's like Higher Side, you know, I have no problem, you know, forking over some money to these programs or contributing and then going away for a while, then coming back, because, hey man, so much of what I've learned about all this stuff, like couldn't happen if people weren't able to have more time on their hands. And everybody has certain obligations. Like I don't have any children, so that's really helpful to like free up time for me. And so, you know, you just got to do what feels comfortable to you. And so I think that that's some direction that I might try to move towards in the future. But I would love to do more research and stuff like that. But I don't know if I can handle it with the way I've neglected people and music in my life. That's what I need to do now, is get back to music. That's going to be my number one focus, and try to get an album that I've had on. It's like a monkey on my back. It's like my Chinese Democracy of the Guns N' Roses. It took like 10 years to happen. And I hope that's going to be a lot better than that album was.
I never even heard it, but I heard of the album.
It's Guns N' Roses.
I like their older stuff, but I don't think I'd like the newer one.
Well, you know, like that's a whole other topic about music, which we could save for another time. But
yeah, man, I'd love to have you on again sometime if you're willing to. I'll try not.
It's nice because like this is something that, you know, it's just nice to kind of talk about things and shoot from the hip. I don't really have to like, oh God, did I give that research right? Did that person say that? You know, like if it's not based on like what Madame Blavatsky said and I misquoted her and now people are going to call me out for it, like that's nice. I don't have to like worry about keeping all that information in my head. It's just more like free flowing. And so it's actually been very nice to like finally be able to talk about some of these things that I wasn't able to in the video. So thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, you're very welcome, man. Yeah, I've asked previous people to close like in their own way. Is there any particular way you want to close?
I guess, you know, just I guess try to treat people the way you'd want to be treated, but I'm hoping that way is a nice way. It's just like, you know, oh, I want people to beat me up. I love that. Wow, that quote doesn't really work so great for that, but you know, yeah, I mean, I think people probably get the vibe, and like just very basic, simple stuff like that. Like, you know, I guess I'll leave it on this. If somebody's where I'm at with a lot of stuff, where you're looking at things that are part of this conspiracy mindset, where things are not what you're being told, that's what I call a conspiracy. You know, you're being said that this is how this happened, and it's not at all how it seems to have happened. Something's not right about it. Whatever that entails, if it starts bringing out ugly, nasty things in you, ask yourself why. What are those ugly, nasty things, and why is that bringing out of me, and what does that mean? And really try to understand what's coming out of you before you let that become who you are, where you go online and you think that somebody gave some information that wasn't accurate and you keyboard worry them about how they're deceiving people and sending people to hell or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, really think about the reasons why you do things, because if you were honest about that, you might not like the reasons why you do it, but at least you could be conscious of it and choose to do it or not without being programmed by something that actually wants you to be like that for an alternative reason that's actually hurting everyone around you and yourself. So internal examination, but you know, being honest about things, even though you might not really like what your answers are.
Don't believe. Don't follow. Do not consume. Do not watch. Largely what I'm talking about here is reclaiming experience. This is what's been taken from us. It's a self-advancing, self-expanding, self-defining process, and it takes no prisoners.
The real world isn't a spiritual world, it isn't a material world, it isn't an empty world, it isn't a solid world. It's simply